the son of Sirzechs Lucifer and Grayfia Lucifuge, a devil who no devil has seen hide nor hair of in 2 centuries, makes himself known to the underworld again. But this time, he is different. Stronger, sexier, and, are those white devil wings? Is he a Nephalem? Why yes he is. Chapter 6. Anything you recognize isn't mine. Well, that was a nice meal. Roxas remarked to Palutena, as the two of them walked out of a restaurant in Kyoto, after a meal that would have beaten the Gremory Manor's meals at least tenfold. The ice cream they had at that place was amazing. Well, yeah. Palutena replied. It was an Italian restaurant. Their desserts are amazing. As is their pizza. Roxas countered. The silver-haired husband and his green-haired wife continued making playful remarks, back and forth, as they walked down a bustling Kyoto street. When they turned the corner into another street, Roxas froze for a second, and walked slightly more slowly as he and Palutena, the both of whom were getting looks from both males and females alike, headed down the street. Something wrong, love? Palutena asked. Just picked up on a few devils moving around this city. Roxas replied. Pretty close to here, too. So what? Palutena shrugged. Supernatural species other than yokai come and go in this city all the time. Yeah, I know, but... Roxas trailed off, and just shrugged. You're right, pal. Maybe I'm just paranoid as fuck that another thing's gonna go wrong from the fiasco that was our trip to the Gremory Manor. Probably. Palutena replied. At least Lucifer, while prideful, actually followed through with caring for his family and not judging them for their species. Especially when he didn't care that neither Rhysvum, Grayfia or Euclid didn't inherit any of your grandmother's genes. Yeah. Roxas replied. As if I need more reason for women to fall at my feet. Imagine a Nephalem, sex demon hybrid. Ooh tilde, Palutena gave a slightly lusty moan at the thought of the idea. Roxas just sighed, and kept walking, with his wife beside him. As the two of them walked through more streets, and eventually came to a back alley of Kyoto, which would permit them to teleport away from the city without being seen by any regular humans, they both heard a loud, female scream. What the fuck was that? Roxas whispered. It came from that way. Palutena replied, pointing. Roxas spread his 10 Nephalem wings, and lifted himself into the air. As Palutena cast a spell to stop either herself or Roxas from being seen or sensed by any supernatural being short of particularly strong gods, and levitated into the air herself, the two of them silently flew to where they thought the scream came from. They were helped along by the fact that they heard another scream, and the two powerful beings found themselves outside a large warehouse. Roxas kicked open the door, and his red eyes widened slightly at the scene they saw inside. A gang of about 15 devils, ranging from about mid-class to ultimate class in terms of power, were stood in the warehouse. The devil that appeared to be the leader of the gang was stood in the middle of the room, holding a little girl none too gently. The little girl that the leader was holding was a young girl with the appearance of a primary school student. She had golden blonde hair, tied in a ponytail and matching eyes. She also had 3 golden fox tails and matching ears. She wore the traditional Miko outfit, the sleeves of which featured a giant red star-shaped pentagram, surrounded by 5 smaller pentagrams in between the points. She was also rather short, around the size of Milika's. The man holding her was pale, with gold eyes and a brown ponytail braided to resemble a scorpion's tail. He wore a white sleeveless jacket with leather belts strapped to it, along with white pants. His jacket was left open, exposing his bare chest, which was crisscrossed with prominent scars. His arms were covered with purple bandages and leather vambraces. He also wore leather boots covering his entire shin with knee guards. On each earlobe was a silver, ring-shaped earring, and near the top of his left ear was another matching earring. He was also staring at the blonde girl in a very perverted manner while holding her, something that Roxas, while a pervert himself, found extremely creepy. It just rubbed him up the wrong way. Hey, assholes! Roxas shouted. All of the devils that were around turned, and about 5 of them were annihilated by balls of intense holy light from Palutena, who conjured them up with a wave of her staff, before they even knew what was going on. 5 devils, including the one holding the kitsune, ran to the back of the warehouse and disappeared through a transportation circle. Roxas followed in hot pursuit before the circle closed, leaving Palutena to deal with those that remained. One devil shot a large blast of fire magic at Palutena, but she simply created a barrier made of holy light and sent it at the blast of fire. The barrier reflected the fire blast, and it hit the devil who sent it, dealing him severe damage. The devil that fired the attack didn't even have time to look up before Palutena pointed her staff at the ground and let out a huge ball of holy light. As she levitated, the remaining devils felt themselves getting pulled towards the huge ball, against their will, like moths were drawn to a flame. Despite their best efforts to leave, they were sucked into the ball, and died instantly. TCH. Palutena landed gracefully on the ground. Pathetic. Line break, So, Yusaka. Seraphal Leviathan, wearing a formal green dress, spoke, as she took a gulp out of her drink, while she and Yusaka, the leader of the Kyoto Yukai, sat at a table. Seraphal's escort, Imogen Belial, the heiress to the Belial clan, stood in the corner. How've you been? Yusaka was a gorgeous-looking young woman in her early 20s, with golden blonde hair, matching eyes and a voluptuous figure. She had 2 fox ears, and 9 fox tails. She wore a traditional Miko outfit. Imogen was, also, a woman of great beauty. She appeared to be in her very late teens, around 19 or 20, and she had silky, yet messy, jet black hair that ran down to her shoulders, like a waterfall. She had calm gray eyes, and her figure, while not as large as Yusaka's, was still rather attractive to look upon. Her attire consisted of a red trench coat, made of leather, that went down to her knees, a gray combat skirt that went down to her knees as well, and a black shirt, that had the logo of the band, Green Day, on it. If one were to look closely, they'd see that Imogen's body had a few small scars on them, as well as being slightly toned. Oh, I've been very good, Seraphal. Yusaka replied, taking a sip from her own drink. Things have been very peaceful here. You? I'm good, Tilda, Seraphal replied, with a smile. Now, let's, the younger of the 2 female Satans saw, out of the corner of her eye, that Imogen had furrowed her brow, and seemed to be concentrating hard on something. Something wrong, Imogen. Just sensed a few devils teleporting to a location close to here. Imogen replied. There's a kitsune with them, too. A kitsune. Yusaka stood up. Is it Kuno? I dunno. Imogen replied. Want me to go check? Please, do. Yusaka replied. She's been wandering off more and more lately, and I won't be able to bear it if she was kidnapped. Before Yusaka was done talking, Imogen had disappeared through a transportation circle. And disregarding what she had said a second earlier, as well as getting a whiff of what Imogen, a demonic dragon, or devil-dragon hybrid, with total power coming close to rivaling that of the 4 Satans, had been talking about, Yusaka got up and ran from the room. Seraphal was quick to follow. Line break. Put up wards, quickly. Tyrion Close, the devil who was holding Kuno, shouted at his subordinates. I'll take the Kitsune princess and what? Roxas had appeared, and with Excalibur Galatine, in the form of a katana, in hand, had cut all of Tyrion's remaining subordinates into pieces without his noticing. As Roxas pointed his sword at Tyrion, he held the blonde Kitsune in front of him. As well as that, a scorpion tail, which had previously been concealed, came from his back, and leveled itself at the Kitsune's throat. One step forward, Tyrion threatened. And the kid gets it. In more than one way, Tilda, you disgust me. Roxas replied, in a deadpan voice. Closing one eye, and sticking his tongue out so he could concentrate, he aimed, and threw Excalibur Galatine. The sword whizzed through the air, and the blade of the sword severed the end of Tyrion's tail, stinger and all, from his body. Letting out a scream of agony, Tyrion shoved the Kitsune away from him by instinct, sending her sprawling onto the ground. He made to run at Roxas, but before he could get anywhere near him, his body erupted in a pillar of black, cursed-looking fire, and in 5 seconds flat, he was incinerated. Roxas turned, and saw an attractive-looking black-haired woman standing in the doorway of the building he was in, with her hand outstretched. I could have taken him. Roxas remarked, as he walked over to the wall, where Excalibur Galatine was embedded, blade first, pulled it out, and turned it back into a hairband, tying his hair back up. I'm sure you could have. Imogen replied, stepping into the room, a slightly easygoing smile on her face. With a sword with that much holy aura coming from it, you could have killed him in an instant. Yeah, I could have. Roxas replied, as he finished tying his hair back up. But since I didn't want to risk him poisoning. He paused for a second, and turned to the little blonde Kitsune, who looked terrified. What's your name, sorry? Kuno. Kuno replied. Kuno. Roxas repeated. I'm Roxas, by the way. Since I didn't want to risk him poisoning Kuno, I decided to eliminate that possibility before killing him. He walked over to Imogen, and extended his hand. Name's Roxas. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I heard. I'm Imogen. And likewise. Imogen replied, accepting the handshake. You're a Nephalem, right? She asked, bluntly. How did you know? Roxas snorted. Well, your silver hair indicates that you're a descendant of either the Lucifer or Lucifuge clans. Imogen replied. And since you're using a holy sword, which devil-human hybrids, even with the holy gene inside them, find it impossible to wield, the only option left is that they're a devil-angel hybrid. That's smart. You're smart. Roxas replied. I like you. Imogen's smile widened slightly, before returning to its usual look. Anyway, you're a hybrid too. Demonic dragon, right? Yup. Imogen replied, sniggering. So, what are you doing in Kyoto? Was just walking around with my wife, then saved Kuno here from. Well, I won't say it here. Too adult. Roxas replied. What are you doing here? Oh, I'm just here with Seraphol. Imogen replied, shrugging. Wait, Seraphol. Roxas repeated, his voice becoming a squeak as his red eyes met Imogen's gray ones. Oh shit, oh shit, oh she, Roxas. An ecstatic, childlike voice shrieked, from right behind Roxas, who, despite having such great reflexes, wasn't able to dodge Seraphol Leviathan, who was dressed in a magical girl's outfit, who had taken a running jump onto Roxas, bowling him over and sending him down to the ground, with her on top of him. I've found you again, after all this time. Yeah, you have. Roxas replied, his voice as enthusiastic as he could possibly make it, as his godmother pressed her lips against his cheek only because he'd managed to move his head out of the way of her lips so she wouldn't kiss him on his own lips. I was so sure that you'd abandon me for good, Tilda. Seraphol cried, as she jumped up, pulling Roxas with her, and gave Roxas a hug, which he didn't, or rather couldn't, return, as Seraphol had pinned his arms to his side while hugging him so tightly. What the hell made you do something like that? Go ask Sirzechs. Roxas replied, his voice the same tone as before. He'll tell you. Why would I go and ask Sirzechs when I can just hear it straight from my godson? Seraphol asked. Besides, once we're done, we can go back to my place. I'll draw you a bath, wash your handsome back like I used to do, and now you're all grown up. The current Leviathan stood on her toes and whispered into Roxas's ear. We can have a night of fun, Roxas. Just you and me, Roxas. Long, uninterrupted, naughty, sexy fun Tilda, if you get me a bunch of the Szechuan sauce, Sarah, we might have a deal. Roxas replied, as he pulled himself away from Seraphol, and held the current Leviathan, who was entirely unable to reach him, no matter how hard her short arms tried, by the head at arm's length. Fucking love that stuff, by the way. As he did so, he looked over at Kuno, who was in a deep embrace from a tall, voluptuous blonde kitsune whom he could only assume was her mother. Man. Roxas thought as he looked the older woman up and down. 2 words. MILF alert. Roxas. You in here, love. Roxas heard Palutena's voice, and he turned around while still holding on to Seraphol, and saw his green-haired wife standing in the doorway, not a speck of devil blood on her flawless body. Oh, hello Seraphol. Yeah, I'm here, Palutena. Roxas replied. And as you can see, I'm a little occupied. While his hand held Seraphol, who was still vainly trying to get closer to Roxas, in place by the forehead, he shook her, making her breasts, which were rather disproportionate to her short, childlike body, jiggle around in her magical girl outfit. I see. Palutena replied, walking over. I think I know how to deal with Seraphol. She then leant down, and whispered into Seraphol's ear. Roxas is married. And you missed the wedding. In an instant, Seraphol froze from the shock of this statement. How could her darling godson Roxas, the closest person she had to a son, or any male companion, for that matter, be married? And how could she have missed the wedding? Seraphol, in the exact position she froze in as Roxas had released her, fell forward onto the ground, and comically stayed in that position, as she babbled to herself. How? It's not possible. How could? Etc. 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 Was that really necessary? Roxas asked. Would you rather have Seraphol have chained you to the wall and was fucking you in an ice-created dominatrix outfit? Palutena did a Shakespeare and replied to Roxas's question with her own question. Fair enough. Roxas replied, sighing. As Palutena just giggled at the sight of Seraphol, Roxas walked over to Kuno and her mother, who looked up. Are you the one who saved my dear daughter? Yasaka asked, standing in front of Roxas. She was just as tall as he was. Yeah. Roxas replied. Though Imogen helped. I see. Yasaka replied, before clasping her hands in front of her and bowing her head to Roxas. Roxas, I'd like to thank you for saving my daughter. I don't know what I would have done if those devils had gotten away. Why would devils want to kidnap Kuno, anyway? Seraphol, who had recovered from her fit, asked. I was going over to Kyoto to try and improve relations between the devils and Yukai. Hera damn it, Seraphol, as smart as you were in terms of diplomacy, you can be dumb sometimes. Palutena replied. I can imagine that a faction of devils want war, or want to force the Yukai into assisting them in the event of a future war, using the daughter of the Queen of Kyoto as leverage. Oh. Seraphol replied. That's probably the case, Professor Palutena. Roxas remarked, teasingly, before turning back to Yasaka. It was the right thing to do. An actual nice guy. Yasaka thought. On top of looking very nice Tilda, Roxas turned around and watched Seraphol slowly return to freaking out over the fact that Roxas had gotten married without her watching it happen, like she had always dreamed of. Palutena probably reminded her of that fact before Yusaka placed a hand on his shoulder. "So, Roxas?" Yusaka asked. "How would you like to stay at my palace? I would hate to see my daughter's savior leave Kyoto so quickly." Roxas had a vivid flash of the fiasco of his visit to the Gremory Manor in his mind. He opened his mouth to say, "No, but thanks for the offer." But he found something was holding onto his trouser leg. Kuno had made her way over to Roxas, and was holding onto him, looking up into his eyes with her round, golden orbs of sight. "Please stay, Roxas," Kuno said, slightly childishly, while still clinging to his leg. "Mother would be sad if you didn't, Tilda." Roxas looked at Palutena, who smirked and nodded, and then at Yusaka. He then got another sight of her body, though concealed by her outfit, and his decision was made. "Fine," he replied. "Yay." Kuno cheered, pulling on Roxas's trouser leg. "Let's go, she cried. Yusaka gave a chuckle, then opened a transportation circle. The two kitsunes and one Nephalem headed into it, and disappeared. Palutena then disappeared through a transportation circle. Imogen, after a second, dragged the freaking out Seraphol into her own transportation circle, and left the scene as well. Line break. It was a few hours after the fiasco at lunch, and Roxas Gremory was sat in her room, lying on her bed, rather in thought. The object of her thoughts happening to be one Roxas Gremory. Roxas had many differing feelings about her previously unknown nephew. On the one hand, she couldn't understand why he didn't use the power of destruction. Even if he said he was a user of the primordial power of darkness, a power that Grayfia used, and Milica's inherited, the pod was still a great power. Just look at Sirzechs, and to a lesser extent, Venelana. While Roxas had heard Roxas's tale of wanting to prove that he could become a powerful devil without the pod, which was fair enough, her cousin, Sarah Bale, an ultimate class devil, was living proof that such a wish was possible. She couldn't help but have a niggling suspicion, in the back of her mind, that there was more to Roxas's reasoning than that. It made the current Gremory heiress curious, and also, interested. Another line of thought that Roxas had about Roxas was his raw power. She'd heard about Nephalems, beings that were a combination of both devils and angels, and had access to the power of the two species. Someone like that had to be powerful enough to easily get her out of her marriage contract with a certain individual. Said certain individual also happened to be coming over to the Orc in 2 days. He was also handsome, too. Stunning. Spunky. Hot. Roxas. Roxas heard a knock on her bedroom door. "You in here?" "Yes." Roxas replied, as the door opened and Sirzechs came walking in. "I'm here, brother. Something on your mind?" Sirzechs asked, as he sat down on the end of the bed. "Wait. I think you are. And I can guess what you're thinking about." "Yeah, Roxas." Roxas replied. "Brother, can I ask you something?" "About Roxas?" "Okay." Sirzechs replied. "What is it?" "Well," Roxas replied, "I'd like to meet Roxas, and talk to him myself. Is it possible that you can have him meet up with me?" Sirzechs blinked, and took a second to process Roxas' request. "Hang on, Roxas. I'm not sure Roxas would want to meet with you so quickly, given what just happened hours before. I'm not saying that the answer is a definite, no, I don't think that now is the perfect time to ask him anything." "Oh." Roxas replied. "But can you at least ask if he'd be willing to, sometime in the future?" "I will." Sirzechs replied. "Just don't get your hopes up. I can't guarantee anything." "Thank you, brother." Roxas replied. Sirzechs smiled, gave his little sister a tight, caring hug. He then got up and left the room, shutting the door behind him. As he started walking away from Roxas' bedroom, he heard a voice speaking to him through his ear. "Don't you know that it's almost certain that Roxas is going to ask Roxas to help her with Riser, right?" Grayfia spoke, in a deadpan voice. "I do." Sirzechs replied. "But don't you know, according to what you've said about your opinion of him, that it's only your status as my queen stopping you from rendering Riser completely ineligible to marry Roxas, which would make me seem like I'm favoring my clan over the good of the underworld?" Grayfia didn't reply, and Sirzechs just smirked. Line break. "Thanks for the meal, Yusaka." Roxas stood up after finishing his meal. He'd been at the Kyoto Palace with Yusaka and Kuno for a few hours, and the two kitsunes had finished a few minutes ago. Kuno had left to prepare for bed, and Yusaka was sat with Roxas. "Should I clear up?" "Oh, of course not, Roxas." Yusaka replied, standing up herself. "You're the guest. You don't have to clear up." "Still." Roxas replied. "It's the least I can do for you, just inviting me into your home like this." Yasaka moved over to Roxas, and gently held his arm, stopping him from picking up the plate that he'd been eating from. I insist. The nine-tailed kitsune whispered, gently tracing circles with her thumb onto the Nephalem's smooth skin. Besides, wouldn't you just like to do something else rather than clean up? She reached up with her other hand, and slowly turned Roxas's face to look at her. Like come and sleep here tonight? Sure. Roxas replied. I'll just go sleep in a guest room or something, if you have one. That won't be necessary. Yasaka instantly spoke. It'd mean more sheets to wash if you slept in the guest room. So, why not bypass that problem by coming and sleeping? She leaned forward and spoke softly into Roxas's ear. With me, Tilda. Honestly. Roxas raised an eyebrow, while keeping it well under wraps that his libido was liking the way that this was going, extremely much. I don't want to be a bother, but if you're okay with it. Oh, I'm very okay with it, Tilda, Yasaka replied. I'll make sure to keep you comfortable, Roxas. Okay, I'm sold. Roxas replied. I'll do it. A celebratory tune going off in her head, Yasaka took Roxas by the hand, and led him to her personal bedroom. It took a full 5 minutes to do, but with every passing second, Yasaka and Roxas's thoughts became more and more sexual, more horny, just more passionate for each other. Fuck me, Yasaka is hot. Roxas thought, as he sneaked a look at Yasaka. The fact that she's a MILF helps a lot. And her animal features. Oh, Amaterasu above. Yasaka thought, as she subconsciously rubbed her legs together with every step she took. I can't wait to get into my room, and give Roxas some real thanks for saving my daughter. Only question is, how long will he last? When they reached Yasaka's room, Yasaka opened the door and made a gesture for Roxas to enter first, which he did. The only things Roxas got to take in about Yasaka's bedroom were that it was really damn big, and there was a king-sized bed in the room. That was all he got to take in, before Yasaka shut the door behind the two of them and cleared her throat. When Roxas turned around, his eyes only got to take in one thing: Yasaka was naked. A second later, Yasaka had dived on Roxas, and had pushed him onto the bed. Lemon starts here, Tilda Roxas. Yasaka whispered. Let's get these pesky clothes off you. After focusing a small spell into Roxas's ear to stop anyone from calling him, so they would be uninterrupted, Yasaka, with Roxas's help, began to remove his clothes. His shirt was the first thing to go into the corner, and as Roxas's abs and muscled chest was exposed, Yasaka found it extremely difficult to just not dive on him and start kissing that chest. Pushing other perverted fantasies to one side for a moment, Yasaka grabbed Roxas's jeans, and pulled them off him in one quick motion. Once they, along with his boxers, went into the corner as Roxas undid his hairband and put it on the bedside table, Yasaka hotly pressed her lips against Roxas's. The built-up sexual tension between the two of them, that had been happening for a few hours, ever since Roxas had arrived at the Kyoto Palace, all came crashing out, as the kiss rapidly deepened, and Yasaka's hands trailed all over Roxas's body. When Roxas tried to shift himself, he found that, to his surprise, he couldn't. It felt like he was moving against some strong, yet invisible, chains. Oh, I've just put a few spells on you, Roxas. Yasaka answered Roxas's question before it began. That body makes me want to just go to town on you, and trust me, I will. Hope you don't mind, Tilda. The blonde vixen shifted herself down to Roxas's crotch, and took his huge cock in one hand, and began to slowly stroke it. Licking her lips at the thought of such a huge tool inside her mouth, her pussy, or even her ass, Yasaka let some of her spit fall onto Roxas's cock, to lube him up a bit as she stroked him, at a more moderate pace. HNN Tilda, Roxas moaned, as waves of pleasure shot through his body at Yasaka's ministrations. Fuck, that's good. That's nice. Yasaka replied. Want more? Roxas's only reply was a nod, in conjunction with a pleasured moan. Very well, Roxas. Yasaka smiled, licking her lips again. I'll take it up a notch, Tilda. The busty nine-tailed kitsune proceeded to open her mouth, and took in about 6 of his 11 inches, straight into her mouth. Making her mouth into a pseudo-airtight vacuum, Yasaka hummed onto the silverette's cock, and used her tongue to flick at Roxas's cock's head while it was in there. Mentally smirking at Roxas's moan of pleasure, and taking the bucking of his hips in stride, Yasaka lifted her head up, so Roxas's dick was only 3 inches or so in her mouth, and then let her mouth swiftly descend on all of Roxas, deep-throating him. Fuck. Roxas cried. Yasaka, see coming. Right as Roxas said this, Yasaka pulled off of Roxas, and grabbed hard onto the base of his cock, effectively cutting off his orgasm. Tilda, Yasaka whispered into Roxas's ear. You don't get to come until I tell you to, Roxas. Try learning some self-control when you're in the bedroom with me. Roxas could only make unintelligible speech through his moans as Yasaka, instead of her mouth, took hold of her large breasts with her hands, and buried Roxas's cock within them. Even though his cock was one of the largest she'd ever seen, her breasts were able to smother his meat sticks, only the tip of it remained. Fuck. Roxas groaned, as he felt his orgasm, so rudely stopped by Yusaka initially, slowly beginning to build up. His cock harshly pulsated between Yusaka's tits, while she rocked them up and down, giving him one of the most seductive expressions ever. Roxas tilde, Yusaka whispered. Make sure not to try and come, okay? Hold out for me a little longer tilde. Unfortunately, right as she said this, Roxas bucked his hips particularly violently, and felt himself about to come, even harder than before. However, Yusaka was there to stop him. She reached under her large breasts, and grabbed the base of Roxas's dick, stopping his orgasm a second time. My, Roxas. Yusaka whispered, as she took her hand off Roxas's cock, and knelt before its owner, who was writhing with the agony of having his climax cut off, twice over. Seems you need a little more help with that self-control I talked about. The blonde vixen queen looked down at her magically restrained lover, and decided to up the ante on him a little bit more, see how far she could take it with Roxas. She decided to wrap her tits around Roxas's cock again, and started rocking them on his huge schlong. As she did so, Yusaka let her mouth descend on Roxas's cock again, pleasuring him on two fronts. NNNGH tilde. Roxas groaned, bucking his hips harder than before from such pleasure, and finding himself unable to stop even when Yusaka layered more spells on his crotch to stop him doing so. You like, Roxas? Yusaka asked, her voice muffled slightly thanks to Roxas's huge cock in her mouth. You like it when I smother your little young giant like this, and give it the attention it's so sorely wanted from me, for all this time? Yes tilde. Roxas moaned, throwing his head back and moaning some more. I love it, yas. Before either Roxas or Yusaka could stop it from occurring, Roxas finally blew his load. And what a hot, thick, sticky load it was. Yusaka gave an exclamation of surprise as Roxas's cum flew inside her mouth, and right down her throat. There was so much cum leaving him in such a short time, the nine-tailed fox found herself unable to take it, and was forced to take her mouth off Roxas's cock, and let him blow the rest of his load all over her tits. My. Yusaka remarked sultrily, licking her lips and lapping up all the cum that landed on them. What a load you blew, Roxas. She lifted up her breasts, and licked the cum off them. Tasty, too tilde. The blonde fox looked before Roxas, who was panting and sweaty while coming down from one of the most orgasmic highs he'd ever had. Still tied down by the enchantments she'd placed on him, Yusaka grinned at the sight of Roxas's cock, which was still hard and throbbing. Time for round 2. Yusaka smiled, shifting herself up so she was straddling Roxas, and took his cock in her hand. She guided it to her pussy, and let herself drop down onto it. Tilde. Almost instantly, Yusaka began rocking her hips on top of Roxas's, her breasts, which shined from a light coating of sweat on her own body, bouncing lightly with every movement that her hips made. Tilde Roxas. Yusaka moaned. Your cock is so big. I can feel myself getting stretched from the inside. By that huge cock. Yusaka reached down and pressed her lips hotly against Roxas's for a second, while moving one of her tails between Roxas and the bed, and towards his ass. The tip of her tail circled around the opening to his asshole, and then went around half an inch in. HNNGH tilde. Roxas groaned, as he felt his ass getting penetrated, and Yusaka proceeded to ride him slightly harder. The hell? Just relax, Roxas. Yusaka replied, gently stroking Roxas's chest as her hips rose and fell on top of his own. I'm told that the asshole is a real weak spot for males when having sex. When it comes to pleasure, that is tilde. Her tail went in a little bit further, and Roxas groaned loudly. He recalled that he and Penemu had done a bit of ass play in their kinkier times together, and that it was very pleasurable. Even if he didn't last very long. As Yusaka continued to ride him, one of her tails began slowly moving towards Roxas's face, and towards his mouth. How about you suck on my tail, Roxas? Yusaka asked, her voice a husky whisper. As long as you don't bite tilde. In Roxas's sexually hazy state, he couldn't stop himself from opening his mouth and letting Yusaka's tail enter it. As he sucked on it gently, the blonde vixen let out a loud, pleasured moan. Fuck. Yusaka moaned. Like that, Roxas. Just like the tilde. Empowered by Yusaka's encouragement, Roxas continued sucking on her tail, while groaning in pleasure from one of her other tails penetrating his ass. The pleasure that the two lovers felt rose to incredible heights within minutes, which was represented by their motions on each other becoming more and more erratic and passionate. HNNGH, shit. Yusaka screamed. I'm AAAAGHH. Yusaka and Roxas both climaxed at the same time, with their own extreme exclamations of pleasure, while Roxas blew his second load of the night, right inside his blonde vixen's waiting pussy. Fuck. Yusaka gave a sigh, and fell down, resting her body on top of Roxas's, feeling fatigued. Roxas. I've never climaxed so hard in my life. I see. Yasaka widened her golden eyes in surprise when she felt Roxas moving out from under her. That's a shame. Yasaka could only mentally acknowledge that her ass cheeks were getting spread out, and that Roxas's cock was entering her asshole. She only physically reacted when Roxas thrusted, balls deep, inside her, with a loud moan of pleasure. Oh Roxas. Yasaka moaned. What are you doing? Oh, just turning the tables. Roxas replied. You dominate for a bit, I dominate for a bit. Fair trade, isn't it? Yasaka moaned loudly as Roxas picked her up, and set her on her hands and knees. Giving a growl of pleasure, Roxas's thrusting speed increased, while his hands trailed up Yasaka's body and landed on her large breasts. She gave a growl of pleasure as Roxas's hands clamped down on her breasts, squeezing the huge orbs of flesh, while turning her head to face him. Is that the best you can do? Yasaka asked. Oh, I dunno. Roxas replied. Can I do any better with fucking your tight ass, and using your hot as hell body in any way I see fit tonight? Let's find out. The speed of Roxas's thrusts increased by almost double, and, after infusing demonic power into his fingers, pinched Yasaka's nipples, which were hard as diamonds, and twisted. Yasaka seemed to give a yip-like noise of extreme pleasure, and Roxas felt a warm liquid oozing from her large breasts, and landing on his hands. Breast milk. Roxas thought. Yasaka, you still lactate? Oh, occasionally. Yasaka replied, moving her hips in conjunction with Roxas's hard, fast thrusts. But not very often AAAGH. Fair enough. Roxas replied, not letting up as Yasaka rode out her orgasm. In fact, as he felt his own orgasm begin to slowly build up again, his thrusts became faster and faster, as the idea of filling this MILF's ass up with his cock gave him a rush of arousal. I'm gonna fucking cum, Yasaka. So, you better be ready to take it tilde. Yasaka could only scream in pleasure as right on cue, Roxas let loose for the third time, right inside her ass. The silver-haired Nephalem groaned in pleasure, and delivered Yasaka a hard smack to the ass, eliciting her own moan of pleasure. Ha, ha. Roxas panted slightly. I think I got another load in me. He pulled out of Yasaka, flipped her over so she was lying on her back, and positioned himself at her entrance, which was still lightly leaking with his cum. Let's see if I can fit it inside you. As Roxas pushed into Yasaka, and ended up balls deep, Yasaka suddenly leapt up, and gently bit down on Roxas's shoulder. Roxas was so surprised by this action that he thrusted, without warning, up into Yasaka, who moaned loudly, but still held on for a second before letting go. Hey, what was that for? Roxas asked, as Yasaka lay back on the bed, moaning loudly and moving her hips in sync with Roxas's. Sorry. Yasaka replied, blushing slightly. It just came to me naturally. I just claimed you as my mate, Roxas. Oh. Roxas replied, slowing down, remembering that Kuroka had done the same thing, but it was by licking his neck, rather than biting him on the shoulder. So, we're basically married, by Yukai laws. That's right tilde, Yasaka replied, her sweaty face giving Roxas an extremely seductive expression. Well, then. Roxas replied, leaning forward. Time to end this wedding night off with a bang, then. Roxas then started screwing Yasaka, who instinctively held onto the headboard of the bed, her new mate's thrusts were so hard. Getting a naughty idea, Roxas reached out with his hands and pushed Yasaka's breasts together, and leaned forward so he could suck on both her nipples at the same time. Along with it being incredibly pleasurable for Yasaka, Roxas found himself being able to take 2 streams of Yasaka's breast milk, which was very tasty at the same time. Holy Amaterasu, fucking hell. Yasaka screamed, as so much pleasure coursed through her body that she felt herself ripping through one orgasm, then another seconds later. Roxas tilde. Yasaka's inner walls clamped down so hard on Roxas that, though his orgasm hadn't remotely built up, he felt himself coming, and cum hard he did, right inside Yasaka's tight MILF pussy. Lemon ends here, fuck. Roxas sighed as he flopped down, sweating like a pig though pigs didn't sweat on top of Yasaka. That sex was awesome. Tell me about it, Roxas. Yasaka replied, as she slowly pushed Roxas off her so he lay on his back, and lay beside him. And now that you're my mate, I can enjoy a lot of fun like that from you in the future tilde, hee, yeah. Roxas replied. Tell me about it. Though why claim me as your mate now? We've barely known each other for a day. Yukai, especially female yukai, especially kitsunes, are beings of passion, Roxas. Yasaka replied. By nature, we prefer to look for a mate that can please us, and give us strong children, over ones that truly love us. It's just the way that we are. She smiled. Though it's definitely nice to find a mate that loves us, as well as being able to give us a nice batch of strong kids tilde, well, that I can do. Quote. Roxas replied. Though I've kinda already promised that my first child will be with someone else. Oh, I understand. Yasaka nodded, smiling. You just seem like the type of guy who'd have a harem. That might include your own family tilde, Roxas shrugged. Maybe. He replied. Anyway, let's get some sleep. Yeah. Yasaka replied, wrapping her tails around Roxas and resting her head on his chest, falling asleep. Roxas, after scratching behind Yasaka's foxy ears for a moment, closed his eyes and did the same. Line break. Goodbye, Roxas. Kuno embraced Roxas in a hug, as he stood in the main hall of the Kyoto Palace. Will you be coming back to Kyoto soon? Probably. Roxas replied. Even if it's just for something I wanna buy. I'll make sure to drop by when I can, though. Both of us would like that. Yasaka replied, walking close to Roxas as Kuno stood back. I eagerly await your return, my mate tilde, the blonde vixen whispered, gently licking Roxas's neck. Roxas sniggered. I bet you will. He replied, creating a transportation circle, walking into it, and disappearing, coming out in his house. Reaching into his jeans pocket and unlocking his phone, his eyes widened at the number of missed calls he had, all of which seemed to come from the night before. There was 1 missed call from Sirzechs, 3 missed calls from Grayfia, and 36 missed calls from an unknown person, though Roxas had a feeling he knew who that unknown person was. Jesus fucking Christ. Roxas muttered under his breath, as he called up Sirzechs, with whom in Grayfia he'd exchanged phone numbers, in between the time they'd reunited and the time he went to the Gremory Manor. Hello. Roxas. Sirzechs' voice came. Is that you? You're on speaker, by the way. Hey, Dad. Roxas replied, stifling a slight yawn. Yeah, it's me. Who else is around? Me. Grayfia's cold voice sounded. Roxas, what were you thinking, not answering my calls like that? I was worried about you after what happened at the Gremory Manor. I wanted to see if you were okay. I'm fine, Mom. Really? Roxas replied. He heard the sound of a door opening on Sirzechs' end. Who are you two talking to? Roxas heard Seraphal's voice. There was some mumbling on the other end of the phone, and then Roxas had to hold the phone a foot away from his ear, as Seraphal shrieked, in her childish voice, down the line. Roxas, why are you so mean? Seraphal cried. I called you and called you and called you, and you never picked up. How could you be so nasty to your own godmother? I honestly wish Fianna was my godmother. Roxas muttered, under his breath. At least she didn't try to shove her tits in my face and actually listen to me, like when I accidentally. Roxas stopped himself, at almost mentioning one of his more painful memories. Bad Roxas, bad. Roxas admonished himself. You swore to yourself you'd never think about that again. What was that? Seraphal's voice called. None of your concern. Roxas replied. Just because your tits were the first ones I ever groped doesn't give you the right to have 100% insight into my personal life. And as for your first question, I was busy. Doing what tilde? Seraphal asked, her voice both dangerously calm and slightly sweet, remembering the time she'd gotten Roxas to squeeze her breasts. He was 15, and she'd snuck into bed with him to make sure that her godson was nice and warm while sleeping tilde, anything else. Roxas replied, in a deadpan voice. Seraphal made to cry into the phone again, but her voice was interrupted by the sound of a magic spell going off, and a muffled yell. Nice work, Grayfia. Roxas heard Sirzechs complimenting his wife on the other end of the phone. Thank you. That ball gag ought to keep her quiet. Grayfia replied. Anyway, Roxas. She spoke. Your father has something to ask you. There was a sound of Grayfia passing the phone over, and Sirzechs speaking. Roxas, remember Rias? The one who rudely but reasonably cried that Palutena was nothing but a myth, completely disregarding how our entire species is considered myth by humans, and also rudely but reasonably questioned me as to why I would seal my ability to use the power of destruction. Roxas replied. Yeah, I remember her. Well, she's requested to meet with you, at your earliest convenience. Sirzechs replied. I only agreed to ask you for her because I'm optimistic that, though you don't like your grandparents, particularly father, I hope you can at least have a positive relationship with at least one member of your family that isn't me, your mother, or your little brother. Fair enough. Roxas replied. Sure. Oh, I thought you'd refu. Sirzechs then realized what Roxas said. Wait, you said yes. No. I said sure. Roxas replied. Though it means the same thing. Quote. Oh. Sirzechs replied. When do you want to see Rias? Because she said that she'd be willing to meet with you anytime. I'll come tomorrow morning. Roxas replied. I'm a little tired right now. Fair enough. Sirzechs replied. I'll let Rias know. Now, get some sleep. He chided Roxas, gently. What time is it for you over there? Since I know the underworld follows the time zone of Japan, and I know you live in a different country. 8 in the morning. Roxas replied, checking his phone. How about you? 3 in the afternoon. Sirzechs replied. Damn. What were you doing last night? A lot. Roxas simply said. Later. And like that, he hung up, and put his phone back in his pocket, and turned around to see Palutena, who was standing in the doorway, having evidently heard everything. Before she even had the chance to ask, Roxas filled her in quickly. After he did, Palutena gave a smile. Good to know you're still open to meeting with individual members of your family. She remarked. Hope you have a better time with your family than I did with mine, all of which are either dead or hate me. Her smile becoming slightly sadder, Palutena sat down on the sofa, and Roxas did the same, wrapping an arm around her. Pal, you know that isn't true. He whispered. You told me yourself that your father looked upon the angels that he created as his own sons and daughters, just like you're his daughter. And I can name 4 angels of that sort that don't hate you in the slightest: Michael, Gabriel, Uriel and Raphael. I'm damn sure there are more that love, or at least like, you, but you get my point, right? Why yeah. Palutena replied, her voice slightly wavery as she returned the hug, and pressed her lips against Roxas's head. I do. Now. Roxas replied. Fancy just chilling today? Yeah. Palutena replied. Though I think you should go to bed early tonight. She said, in a perfect concerned wife voice. Roxas chuckled, as Palutena could pull that voice off perfectly. Yeah, I'll make sure to. He replied. Chapter 7. Anything you recognize isn't mine. Retying his silver hair back up into his signature ponytail with his galladine-turned hairband, a naked Roxas Gremory stepped out of his shower room, and yawned, while turning to Akeno, who was tying her hair up as well. I can't even remember when the last time I got out of bed before 9:30 a.m. was, Akeno. Roxas remarked, picking up his phone, which read 7:22 a.m. The fact that I was screwing you into the bed last night makes it all the weirder that we're up this early. He dropped his phone back onto the bed, and started to get dressed, as Akeno finished tying her hair up into its usual ponytail, and started to dress herself as well. Me neither, to be honest, Roxas. Akeno replied, as she pressed her naked body, clad only in a purple thong, against Roxas, clad only in a pair of jeans. And though I would love to spend today with you, just the two of us, in bed, exploring every nook and cranny of each other's bodies tilde. I have to go and meet up with my aunt. Roxas replied. Today. Sorry, Akeno. It's all right tilde, Akeno replied, withdrawing and pouting slightly. Can I come with you? Roxas turned, as he picked up his skillet t-shirt and slung it on him. Why? Well, you've said a few times that you think Rias and I would get on pretty well. Akeno replied. Now's as good a time as any to actually meet her. Roxas blinked, as he processed Akeno's request. Fair enough. He replied, shrugging. Finish getting dressed and come on. Roxas left his room, and walked downstairs, where he saw Palutena sat on a stool at the table, and Asia cooking breakfast. Palutena looked up, noticed Roxas, and grinned. Someone was busy with their favorite fallen angel human hybrid last night. She remarked, as Roxas hopped onto the stool next to her. Well, of course I would be. Roxas shrugged in reply, as Palutena kissed him. Akeno's easily the best at seducing me out of my lovers, behind you and Penemu. True. Palutena remarked, nuzzling her face into Roxas's neck. Asia walked over with a plate of food, and handed it to Roxas, who smiled as he tucked in. Thanks, Asia. He thanked the blonde nun, who was dressed in a pair of jean shorts, and a yellow short-sleeved shirt with Pikachu's face on it. Honestly, you're like our own personal angel, with how well you cook. Asia blushed red from the compliment, stammered out why you're welcome, Roxas. And returned to cooking Palutena's breakfast, as Akeno came walking downstairs. Today, Akeno had opted to wear a purple leather jacket, over a light purple skin-tight top that exposed her midriff thanks to her large breasts, and a pair of black jean shorts that exposed a lot of her sexy legs. Looking stylish, Akeno. Roxas complimented his raven-haired lover. Come have some breakfast, then we'll go. Akeno smiled, and joined Roxas and Palutena at the table. After she had some breakfast and decided to tease Palutena by playing at being Roxas's wife by feeding him, and calling him her darling, the Nephalem of the human fallen angel hybrid stood up, and walked towards a transportation circle that Roxas had created. See you later, love. Palutena gently embraced Roxas. I'll try not to get too horny while you're gone, Tilda. Roxas sniggered, and made to walk into the circle, but Palutena called again. Wait, something just popped into my head. Remember that favor that Azazel promised you? Yeah. Roxas replied. What of it? Well, are you going to cash it in? Palutena asked, sitting down on the sofa and turning on the TV. And if so, what is it gonna be? Just curious is all. Roxas replied. I probably will at some point. And I'll probably ask him to upscale this villa, or just buy me a new, bigger one. Since this place was built to comfortably hold 6 people, me, you, Akasha, Valian and Penemu. But, with Asia and Kuroka, no offense meant to either of them, on top of that, practically living here now, making a total of 8, this house is getting stretched. Fair enough. Palutena replied, shrugging. See you. Quote. Roxas nodded, and triggered the magic circle, sending him and Akano away in a flash of light. Line break. Rias, who was sat on a sofa in the orc room, and her peerage, which were stood behind her, and Grayfia, who was stood in the corner of the room, all waited, with all except Grayfia, whom it took a lot to phase even slightly, and Azane, who didn't even know what the hell was going on, feeling extremely tense. A silver transportation circle opened up, and Roxas and Akano came out of it. Roxas looked around, and his eyes set on Rias. Hey, Rias. He greeted his aunt. You asked me here so you could talk to me about something. He looked up. Hey, Mom. Grayfia inclined her head to Roxas. She would have liked to walk over to him and hug him, but she was on duty as a maid, so she kinda couldn't. Let me guess. Those 4 are your peerage? Roxas asked. I've seen them before. He then jerked his head at Akano. This is Akano, a friend of mine, by the way. She just decided to tag along with me when I came. Very well. Rias replied. And yes, they are. My queen, Mirajan Strauss, my rook, Kaneko Tuju, my knight, Kiba Yudo, and my pawn, Azane Hyodo. Thought so. Roxas replied, looking in between the members of Ria's peerage in turn. He passed over Mirajan without comment, before looking at Kaneko. Tuju, right? He asked. You related, by any chance, to a young lady called Sei Tuju? Quote. Never heard of her. Quote. Kaneko replied, looking straight at Roxas, who shrugged. He replied. Must be a coincidence. Or something else. Ria's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, an action not missed by Roxas, who kept looking in between the members of Ria's peerage. He looked over Kiba, and only focused his eyes on him for a second, before meeting eyes with Azane. Ooh. He whispered. Never thought I'd be seeing that again. Quote. And I never thought I'd have to see your murdering face again, Roxas Gremory. Dedraig snarled, startling everyone in Ria's peerage with how hostile he sounded, while the boosted gear appeared on Azane's arm. If I wasn't trapped in one of Yahweh's little trinkets, I'd incinerate your ass here and now. But you were trapped in one of Yahweh's little trinkets, so you can't do jack shit. Roxas replied, easily. Excuse me, but what's going on? Rias asked, looking between the gauntlet and Roxas. Do you have history with my nephew, Dedraig? Oh, you fucking bet I do, Gremory. Dedraig growled in reply to Rias. Your unnatural existence of a nephew over here didn't just kill my strongest host, but he as good as killed my second strongest host as well. The only one who's allowed to fight and kill my host is the host of that bastard Albion, and you stole that opportunity from me, as well as Belzard and Elsha, you son of a bitch. The temperature of the room dropped so low that everyone, even Grayfia, had to shiver slightly. The table and furniture began to be covered in a light coating of ice, and lightning began to gather around Roxas's body. Glaring at Azane, or more accurately, at Azane's left hand, he spoke. And his voice wasn't his usual, laid-back tone, but rather, a voice harder than steel, and hovering around absolute zero. I accept responsibility for Belzard's death, as he'd gone insane on the power that you granted him. Roxas spoke. He'd gone Juggernaut drive and threatened the lives of those I cared about. He didn't even deserve to die the death I granted him, on the end of my Excalibur Galatine. Kiba stiffened at the mention of the word, Excalibur, but Roxas ignored him. But Dedraig. I'll say this once and only one. Roxas spoke, his voice nearly as much a growl as Dedraig's. Don't. You. Dare. Talk about Elsha. In front of me. A spear made of light appeared in Roxas's hand as he pointed it at the gauntlet that the boosted gear took the form of. I've a damn good mind to kill your host, or at the least severely harm her, right here and now, just so you don't get your precious rematch with Albion. Azane widened her eyes and began to sweat. She had barely any mastery of the boosted gear, and after how Roxas had killed a Poge as easily as he did, she didn't have a chance in hell of defending herself against him. Choose, D-Drake. Roxas spoke, in the same chilling tone, as the room's temperature dropped another degree or so. Your desire to not miss out on a battle with Albion for the third time. Or your desire to get revenge on me. There was a tense silence for a full 13 seconds, as everyone in Rhea's peerage, as well as Grayfia, began to subtly prepare for a fight. However, it didn't come to that, as D-Drake gave a HMPH, and the boosted gear deactivated itself. Roxas gave a sigh, and the room began to thaw itself, as a result of returning to its normal temperature. Good. Roxas remarked, waving his hand and casting a spell that dried everything up. Rheas, who had gone quiet, spoke up. Roxas, why did you threaten to kill a member of my peerage? She cried. Did you really have to go that far? Yes. And calm down. Roxas replied, before turning to Azane. Sorry I had to threaten to kill you there, Azane. Azane replied, who was just wrapping her head around the fact that she wasn't going to die. Azane. Nice name, by the way. Roxas replied. Anyway, sorry I had to threaten to kill you. I didn't actually want to do it, since I got no reason to, but it was the only way I could get D-Drake to back his oversized ass down. Azane had gone as red as the gauntlet that was on her arm mere moments ago, and Roxas chuckled. Anyway, Rheas. What have you asked me here for? Yes, I'm curious to hear what you want with my eldest son as well, Rheas. Grayfia spoke up. Well, you see, Rheas began, but her words were interrupted as an orange magic circle with a bird encased in the center of it, formed itself in the entrance to the room, and flames began to erupt from it. Roxas was unimpressed. In fact, he was so unimpressed that he was tempted to freeze the demonic flames which were beginning to clear coming from the magic circle, right there and then, but he held himself back. When the flames completely cleared, a tall and handsome man in his early 20s with short blonde hair and dark blue eyes became known to everyone in the room. He wore a burgundy blazer with gold embroidery on the right, with matching pants and black dress shoes. Underneath this open blazer was a white dress shirt that wasn't fully buttoned, giving a slight view to his toned chest. It's been a while since I've been to the human world. The man turned around, and looked at Rheas. I've come to see you, my darling Rheas. Rheas frowned, before the man looked at Roxas, who also had a frown on his face. The gears were starting to turn in his head, and they didn't paint a very pretty picture. Who's this guy? He asked, looking unconcernedly at Roxas, before noticing Akino. And who is this lovely young lady? None of your concern, Blondie. Roxas replied, having immediately taken a disliking to the man, who adopted a rather ugly expression on his face. Blondie. Don't try and insult Riser Phoenix. He said, before turning to Rheas. Rheas, you should try and control your servants. He's not my servant, Riser. Rheas replied. He's my nephew, Roxas Gremory. Quote. Riser shrugged, stepped around Roxas while looking extremely openly at Akino's ass and sat down on the sofa, right next to Rheas, as Roxas and Akino went and stood next to Grayfia. Mind filling me in on this, Mom? Roxas whispered to Grayfia. What the hell is Rheas doing with Fianna Asmodeus' youngest brother? Lord Zeoticus and Lord Renzo Phoenix worked out a marital contract for Lady Rheas and Lord Riser, about 10 years ago. Grayfia whispered in reply. Rheas has hated the idea of the contract from as soon as she heard about it, and has wanted out ever since. The whole room was then enveloped in a tense silence as Riser, looking quite satisfied with himself, played with the hair of Rheas, who looked extremely uncomfortable, and placed his hand on her leg, slowly going up towards her skirt, until Rheas, having finally had enough, stood up. Cut it out already, Riser. She snapped. I told you last time. I'm not marrying you. Quote. Oh, but Rheas. Riser replied, nonchalantly. You're in no position to be selfish. Your family has its back against the wall, as does my illustrious family, to an extent, and our fathers knew that this would be a perfect way to produce strong grandchildren. Roxas gave a loud cough into his hand, which to Akino, Grayfia, and everyone else in the room, sounded suspiciously like the word, bullshit. Riser heard as well, and stood up, turning to Roxas. Did you say something? He asked. Or were you just clearing your throat? The latter. Roxas replied, his voice light and polite. Sorry, just keep going. Pretend I'm not even here. I got a tickle in my throat, happens all the time. He coughed into his hand 3 more times, and Riser distinctly heard the words, bullshit. Fucking bullshit. Come through the coughs. Catching on, Riser stood up, angry. He walked over to Roxas, and stood before him. Riser might have stood a quarter of a foot taller than Roxas, but he was no more scared of Riser than he would be scared of a housefly. Are you insinuating that something Riser Sirzechs, said, is bullshit, you lower-class mongrel? Riser asked, flecks of hot spit landing on Roxas's face as he shouted. Yes. Roxas replied. Now step away. Your breath smells like chicken, and I don't like it. Love eating it, though. Quote. I would also advise you to step away from my son as well, Lord Riser. Grayfia added, stepping forward. As well as not to insult him. Or else I will have to take action. Riser looked at Grayfia, who glared back at him, and stepped back. When ordered something by the ultimate queen, even I can be somewhat fearful. Riser remarked, sitting back down and looking back up at Rias. As, only behind my great older sister, Fianna, and Seraphal Leviathan, you are the strongest female devil. Anyway, Rias. As I said before, you can't afford to be selfish when it comes to the matter of your family. I don't intend to bring my family down. Rias snapped back. I absolutely intend to find myself a man that I can call my husband, but they will be my choice. And no matter what you say, Riser, my choice will not be you. Your choice doesn't matter, Rias. Riser replied, standing up and grabbing Ria's face. Our fathers negotiated this contract between the two of us, and your father, a devil vastly more important than you, and whose choice matters more, chose me as your husband. I will not have you sully my good name by refusing me. I told you, Riser, no. Rias shouted, pulling herself out of Riser's grip. I would rather marry a male of my own family than marry you. Sirzechs, Roxas, fuck, even Milikas. I don't care, fucking anyone but you. Actually, Rias, if I might make a small point. Roxas asked. It might be distant, but you're actually related to Riser. Eh? Rias looked at Roxas, blinking. How do you mean? Well, I actually did my research on a couple of things. Roxas replied, as everyone, even Riser, stopped to look at him. You ever heard of the demonic Genesis ritual, Rias? Why yes. Rias replied. It was used by the first Lucifer to create the devil race. A mutation of the biblical god's angelic creation power. Indeed. Roxas replied. Well, something not very well known is that a spin-off, shall we say, version of that ritual was used by Lucifer and Lilith to create 72 special devils, all of which were brothers and sisters, in their own way. The 72 pillars. Rias whispered. Baal, Agares, Sirzechs, Gremory, Belial, all of them. All of them. Roxas replied. Gremory and Sirzechs, in particular, happen to be your great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, and Riser's great-grandmother, do they not? Wait. Rias had just put 2 and 2 together. Then that means Riser is your third cousin, yes. Roxas replied. A relatively minor issue, to be honest, but I just thought I'd throw it out there. Quote. Rias had gone slightly green, and Riser seemed to shrug the knowledge off. It doesn't matter. He leaned forward. I'll take you back to the Underworld, Rias, then we can be married, and live a good life together. As distantly related as we are, I will not let that stand in my way. A red and black aura seemed to culminate around Rias, and she looked ready for a fight. But Grayfia stepped forward. If I might make a suggestion, the two of you. She spoke. I am here on orders of Sirzechs, and he predicted that this might happen. As such, I have been ordered to suggest a last resort measure if no agreement is reached. You are welcome to settle your situation through a rating game, if you so wish. Rating game. Azane spoke up. It's basically a mini-war with Rias and Riser as the heads of your respective countries, if you want to put it that way. Roxas explained. Given the size of my aunt's peerage, and the fact I've seen Riser's peerage in action on TV, I'd say a rating game between you Rias and Riser would look like a pre-United Nations involvement Korean War. That is to say, a fucking massacre. In Riser's favor. I've played the game many times, and I am a known victor. Riser remarked. And you, Rias, aren't even a qualified player, with little to no peerage to speak of. Whereas. He snapped his fingers, and another transportation circle opened, and after the firestorm disappeared, 15 women, of all shapes and sizes, and all of varying states of beauty, came out. You can't hope to win against me and my lovely servants, Rias. Riser remarked, walking over to a particularly beautiful woman with purple hair, and groping her obscenely large breasts. Even if you, a rating game virgin, had a week to train yourself in, you'd never be able to defeat me. Quote. Oh, yes I will. Rias replied. All to it, Riser. I'll settle this with you through a rating game. My servants and I will train ourselves to the best of our ability in a week, and once we're done, we'll annihilate you. Riser laughed, loudly and mockingly. I look forward to it, my love. He replied. He opened a transportation circle, and disappeared, still groping the busty purple-haired woman. Long after he was gone, Rias panted, coming down from the emotional high that her passionate declaration had given her, while Grayfia silently teleported out to inform Sirzechs and Sirzechs of the situation before she heard a slow clap. Nice speech, Rias. Roxas remarked, a smirk on his face. It's a wonder you don't go into politics, you'd be a great candidate, with oration skills like yours. Then again, Hitler was a great orator, so. He shrugged. Anyway. You plan on training you and your peerage, to the best of your ability, I think you said. Why yes, that was what I asked you here for. Rias replied. Roxas, will you train me and my peerage for the raiding game against Riser? Roxas blinked. And why should I do that? He asked. I don't remember hearing you mention me in that little declamation of yours, once. Did you hear, Akeno? Akeno shook her head. Yeah, exactly. Roxas remarked, turning to Rias. So why should I help you, when you said it would be you and your servants, not me, who would train yourselves up? Roxas, please. Ria's voice, rather than the passionate tone that he heard moments before, became more desperate. I've looked for every possible way out. Renouncing my position as heiress, having Riser killed, even. Okay, that's enough, Rias. Roxas replied. In actuality, okay. Rias blinked. What? She replied. I said, okay, Rias. Roxas said. Sirzechs was the one who placed you in that engagement, and I'm feeling particularly vindictive towards him right now. Ria's face lit up as she realized what her nephew was saying. So, therefore, I'll help you. Roxas replied. Besides, I remember saying a while ago that I couldn't wait to see the look on my grandfather's face when the next person, after me, he tries to groom into his perfect heir/puppet, goes against his wishes in any way. Winning that raiding game and leaving the engagement would be a pretty good way to go about that happening, don't you think? Rias rushed forward, and wrapped her arms around Roxas. Even if she was his aunt, Roxas mentally appreciated her rather generous assets pressing up against him. Thank you, Roxas. Rias spoke, into his shoulder. Thank you. It's okay. Roxas replied, as Rias released him. Now. I've got something to do. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Chat to Akeno while I'm gone. Roxas created a silver transportation circle, and disappeared. 5 minutes later, inside which Rias and Mira had started to make very pleasant conversation with Akeno, Roxas returned. All right, all done. He spoke. Rias, Mira, Kaneko, Kiba, Azane. Can you please be here around this time tomorrow? So I can take you to where you'll be trained. There was a general murmur of assent, and Roxas nodded. Good. See you tomorrow. He looked at Akeno. Come on, Akeno. Akeno waved a goodbye to Rias and Akeno as she followed Roxas into the transportation circle, and disappeared along with him. Line break. I'm back, Tilda. Roxas called, as he and Akeno arrived back in his house. Penemu, Akasha, Valian and Palutena, who were all watching TV, looked up. Hey, Roxas. Valian greeted him. So, what's going to happen? Well, remember that holiday villa in Greece that I've had my eye on for a while? Roxas asked. You mean the 13-bedroom, houses around 31? Penemu asked. What of it? Well, I called in that favor from Azazel, and he's buying it. Roxas replied. And my aunt and her peerage will be staying there for a week with us. Akeno, Penemu, Akasha and Valian all made gestures of excitement, as they'd all seen the villa, and loved the idea of moving there. Palutena's reaction, however, was more muted. She smiled, but that was about it. Akeno, Akasha, Valian, can you come with me when I go tomorrow? Roxas asked. Since I've agreed to train Rias and her peerage, and I'll need your help. No problem, Roxas. All three sexy as fuck women replied, practically in unison. And Palutena, would it be alright if you came with us as well? Roxas added. I've got an idea for a possible modification I could make to the place, and I'd need your help for it. Okay, Roxas. Palutena replied, sighing. Sweet. Roxas replied. Someone go and tell Asia and Kuroka what's happening. Valian got up and left. Akeno, Akasha and Penemu left as well, deciding to go and do something else, leaving Roxas and Palutena alone. Roxas plopped himself down beside his green-haired wife, who was looking at him. He snorted. I know that look, Palutena. I'm sure you do. Palutena replied. I'm not unhappy with you for this, but you do know who has supernatural dominion over Greece. The Greek pantheon. Roxas replied. Yes, I know, Palutena. And it isn't a crime for a supernatural being to live in Greece. I know several fallen angels that live in Athens, for example. Some of the Greek gods can be dicks, like Ares and Hermes, but Zeus isn't that bad. I know that, but, Palutena tried to reply, but Roxas, knowing exactly what she was going to say, stopped her. Pal, I know what you're thinking, and everything will be fine. The silver-haired Nephalem assured his green-haired wife. If the worst comes to the worst, we'll be prepared for it. You know as well as I do that the number of Greek gods that could beat either of us on our own in a one-on-one battle can be counted on one hand, with fingers to spare, Hades. And what is more, he added. That number lowers down to a big fat 0 when I go Twilight God, or when you and I work together. Quote. I know that. Palutena replied. Just promise me that if it comes to that, you please don't go into the damned form. It almost tore your soul apart last time you used it, and that was only after 15 seconds. Roxas remembered full well what Palutena was talking about. I promise, love. Roxas replied, wrapping his arms around Palutena and kissing her. You know that I do. Good. Palutena replied. Now. She shifted her body so she was sat on her husband's lap, and looked at him in a rather sultry way. What should we do for the rest of the day? Roxas grinned. Line break. It was the next day, after school. Rias and Mirajan were walking to the Occult Research Club room, where Roxas had asked her and her peerage to congregate at the end of the day, so he could take them to wherever he would be taking them to, in order for them to train for their raiding game against Riser. With Rias and Mira, however, was Sona Citri, the heiress of the House of Citri, the president of the student council at Kuo Academy, and Ria's best friend, along with her queen, the vice president of the student council, Tsubaki Shinra. Sona was a young woman who wore purple-rimmed glasses, with a slim figure, black hair styled into a short bob cut, and violet eyes. Tsubaki was a young woman with long, straight black hair that extended down to her knees, with split bangs at her face, and heterochromic eyes, a violet left eye and light brown right eye. She wore blue, semi-rimmed glasses with square lenses. I've got the absence of you and your peerage approved, Rias. Sona remarked to her best friend. Thank you. Rias replied. I'll make sure to make it up to you. A rare smile came across Sona's face. Oh, you shouldn't have to. The Citri heiress replied. Just worry about training yourself to beat that scumbag 7 ways from Sunday. Though I am curious to meet Roxas, as I've heard a lot about him. From Seraphal. Yes. Sona replied. She was named by Sirzechs and Grayfia as Roxas's godmother after his birth, and, in her own words, she taught him everything he needed to know in his cute little life. Since that's Seraphal we're talking about, Sona, I'd take her word with a metric ton of salt. Mirajan remarked. If it was coming from someone like Fianna, though. Yeah. Sona replied, as the 4 devils, 2 born devils, 2 reincarnated, walked into the building and went to the orc room. Where Riser was sat on one of the sofas, looking as arrogant as ever. What the fuck? Rias cried, preparing a magical attack, as Mirajan, Sona and Tsubaki all tensed up at the sight of Ria's former fiancé. Riser, what the hell are you doing here? It's rude to talk about someone who's listening, my darling Rias. Riser remarked lightly, as he stood up. With a yell of rage, Rias let loose a blast of her power of destruction, and Riser created a shield out of a magic circle, which easily blocked the attack, and created a huge plume of smoke that obscured him from sight, and filled the room up. Rias, Mira, Sona and Tsubaki coughed and sputtered from the smoke, and once it cleared after a minute, Rias, contrary to what she expected, saw Roxas standing in front of her, instead of Riser. And he was laughing. Hard. Roxas. Rias cried, shocked out of her wits at what had just transpired. It was you. Yup. Roxas replied, still laughing. Amazing what a little transformation magic can do, isn't it? Wait, you know how to do transformation magic? Sona asked, after recovering from a small laugh. Even Tsubaki was giggling. Isn't that one of the hardest branches of magic? Yeah. Roxas replied. I just need to look at someone, and I can transform into them with a little bit of work. You should have seen Palutena's face when she walked into our bedroom one night, and saw a perfect replica of herself, masturbating on the bed. He sniggered for a moment. Anyway. He looked at Sona and Tsubaki. Who are these two, Rias? I'm Sona Citri. Sona stepped forward. Little sister of your godmother, and friend of your aunt. This is Tsubaki, my queen. Cool. Roxas replied, flopping back down onto the sofa, where Riser had sat minutes before. We'll just wait for the rest of your peerage, Rias, then we can leave. Rias sat down at her desk, and Mira stood beside her, while Sona and Tsubaki sat down on the sofa opposite him. If I might ask you something, Roxas. Sona spoke up. Seraphal told me that she, apparently, taught you everything you knew. Is that actually true? No. Roxas replied. All Seraphal taught me was how to do ice magic, unless you count her making me grope her tits for future reference for when we're married. Tilda, her words, not mine, as teaching me something. Ah. Sona replied, coughing. I see. After about 5 minutes, Kiba and Azane, with Kiba looking at Roxas with suspicion, and Azane looking with slight interest, walked into the orc room, and after another 2, Kaneko entered the room. Right. Roxas said, with a rather business-like tone. Let's go. We don't have all day. Roxas created a transportation circle, and led Rias and her peerage into it. 1 second later, he activated it, and another second later, everyone in Ria's peerage had to cover their eyes, as the sun blazed down on them with intense heat. Oh, yeah, I almost forgot to mention. Roxas remarked. It gets pretty toasty where I now live. You don't say. Kiba replied. Where are we? Greece. Roxas replied, promptly. Near the Sexier beach, if I do recall. But anyway. Let's get inside. Roxas led Rias and her peerage into the huge house, which looked extremely modern and very nice. There was even a gigantic swimming pool outside. Once they were inside, Rias and her peerage found themselves in a huge foyer-like room. I'll show you to your bedrooms later. Roxas remarked, as he led the 5 devils off through a door that was situated inside a grand-looking staircase, and down a set of stairs. Once they were at the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a moderately sized room, with a few people hanging around in it. Rias and her peerage recognized 2 of the women, Palutena, who was waving a large golden staff with blue ball on the end of it at a large door, at the other end of the room, and Akino. However, there were 2 other women, a silver-haired woman with hazel eyes, and a pink-haired woman with green eyes, that Rias and her peerage did not recognize. There was also a young man there, talking with Akino. The young man had short, black hair, and pale gray eyes. He was rather handsome, and around the same height as Azane. He wore casual attire. Palutena stopped waving her staff, and walked over to Roxas. It's done. She stated. I'm gonna go rest now. You do that. Roxas replied. As Palutena walked past him, Roxas gave her ass a swat, making her yelp in surprise as she walked away. Once she was gone, the boosted gear activated on Azane's arm, and the divine dividing wings activated on Valian's back. Well. It's been a while, Albion. Dedraig growled. Decided to conspire with the murderer of my 2 strongest hosts. My host has feelings for the son of the current Lucifer, Dedraig. Albion replied. Conspiring against you or your host has nothing to do with it, and it won't get in the way of our inevitable fight. I doubt that very much. Dedraig replied. Since he decided to kill both Belzard and Dedraig stopped when Roxas shot the gauntlet a warning look, and created a light spear in his hand, pointing it squarely at the gauntlet, just like he had done the day before. The Welsh dragon gave a HMPH, and disappeared. Alright, everyone, listen up. Roxas took a breath, and spoke, getting the attention of everyone in the room, while the divine dividing wings deactivated. This door, he pointed to the door that Palutena had been waving her staff at, leads to a dimension in which times flows 30.4375 times that of the outside world, aka here, this house, the rest of the human world, you get my point. Azane blinked. That's a bit specific. 30.4375 times that of the outside world. I should be training your brains instead of your bodies. Roxas muttered. But in layman's terms, 1 day out here, 1 month in there. Got it. Oh, okay. Azane replied. The rest of Ria's peerage nodded. So, we'll actually be spending 6 months training instead of a week. Rias asked. Since the first day of my week of training was yesterday. Yup. Roxas replied. Any other questions? Yes. Mirajan replied. What about food? And other functions? Roxas blinked. We'll have to eat, and go to the toilet insanely often, won't we? Mira explained. And since time flows a lot slower in that dimension than out here, won't we need food? Every 10 minutes or so, in out here terms. Roxas finished for him. No, you won't. But that was a smart question. You're smart. I like you. Mira smiled. Palutena assured me, Roxas continued. That all your bodily functions will slow down in sync with the time chamber. So, basically, you'll still only need to go to the toilet every 6 or so out here hours, which would be a week, give or take several hours. Ah. Mira nodded. Any other questions? Roxas asked. Because as a wise man once said, if you don't shake a leg, I'll fucking break it for you. Did anyone actually say that? Kaneko asked. Yeah. Me. Roxas replied. Anything else? No one else had any questions. Good. Roxas opened the door, which opened into a beautiful, huge open field. Now. Everyone in. He shepherded everyone inside, and shut the door behind them. And one more thing before you start. With a snap of Roxas's fingers, weighted braces appeared on each of the wrists and ankles of Rias, Mira, Kaneko, Kiba and Azane. These braces will subtly get heavier and heavier as time goes by. He explained. Right now, they're only slightly heavier than what you're used to carrying, aka your own body weight. If you wear them constantly while training, you won't even notice them, since you'll be getting physically stronger all the time, which eliminates the need for normal physical training, which take up at least 3/4 of your training, otherwise. The silver-haired Nephalem snapped his fingers again, and the weighted braces disappeared. When Rias and her peerage all exclaimed in surprise, and grabbed at their wrists or ankles, Roxas sniggered. Oh, don't worry yourselves. He said. You're still wearing those braces. They just won't interfere with everyday life. You won't be needing to think about putting them back on until the end of your training, and after that, I'll consider putting them on you again so you can keep training. And before you ask, they still work. After a yawn, Roxas spoke again. Okay, Rias. Quote. Roxas pointed at Rias. You'll be training with Akeno. Akeno smiled at Rias, who walked over to her. Mirajan. You're off with Valian. He pointed to the silver-haired girl, who Mirajan bowed to, and walked over to. Not relative to Seituju, aka Kaneko. He pointed at Kaneko. You'll be off with Akasha. Kaneko mutely walked over to the pink-haired vampiress. Azane, you'll be with your fellow Longinus wielder, Tobio Ikus. A friend of mine. Quote. Azane walked over to Tobio. And Kiba. Roxas turned his red eyes on Kiba. You're with me. See you in about 2 weeks. He called to everyone, and activated 4 magic circles underneath them at the same time, sending everyone but Kiba and himself away. Line break. Kaneko and Akasha. Kaneko's jumped in the air, avoiding an attempted sweep kick from Akasha, and threw a punch in return. Her fist impacted Akasha's face, but the vampiress didn't even flinch. Instead, she swung her other leg up, catching Kaneko by surprise and hitting her in the face. Ria's rook flew sideways, and landed on the soft ground. Jumping back to her feet, she redoubled her efforts to get her trainer to feel some sort of pain, and rushed at her. Once she reached her, Kaneko began swinging hard at Akasha, who, without even moving from her spot, managed to stop every attack she made. She leaned from side to side, making sure that Kaneko's fists came agonizingly close to her, just to aggravate the white-haired midget even more, diverted her punches with her arms or hands, and even, in one case, blocked Kaneko's punch with the center of her forehead. Kaneko gave a hiss of pain at Akasha's last block, as her head was hard and resilient, more like punching a brick wall than anything. Capitalizing on this opportunity, Akasha swung at Kaneko with a hard roundhouse kick, caught her on the left side of her head, and sent her flying onto the ground. Nice try, Kaneko. Akasha remarked, stepping forward. I think I got a good idea of how you fight, in the last few hours. Quote. Kaneko got to her feet silently, and looked at Akasha. Your strength, while rather weak, by the standards of rooks I've seen in raiding games, is sufficient to do noticeable damage to members of Riser's peerage, maybe even one individual member out in a single hit. Which, to be fair, isn't very impressive, as the members of Riser's peerage, with the exception of his queen, and Riser himself, are all low-class devils. Akasha stated. However, that doesn't eliminate the possibility of improvement in your physical strength, though that's what those weighted braces are for. Quote. Then what are you going to do to train me? The still on the ground Kaneko asked. Simple. Akasha replied, waving her hand and creating several humanoid figures, purely out of what seemed to be blood. Let's just say. I believe in learning on the job. So, get back on your feet before my blood soldiers make you stay down there. Also, kicks only or you'll regret it. Kaneko jumped to her feet, and flipped away from one of the blood soldiers. Landing on the ground, she swung her leg at the head of one of them, and the head, once her foot made contact with it, suddenly turned to liquid and collapsed, with the body still moving around, as if it hadn't just been decapitated. Quote. Ew. Kaneko muttered, as she realized that the blood was still on her leg, and had stained her sock and shoe. However, she had to ignore that and get out of the way of a would-be devastating punch, coming from another of the blood soldiers. On instinct, Kaneko thrust her fist at the chest of the blood soldier, and though her fist connected, it was almost crushed with how hard the surface of the blood soldier's chest had become. Letting out a scream of pain, Kaneko fell backwards onto the ground. "I said kicks only, you know," Akasha remarked, lightly, as she took a crimson-red lollipop out of a pocket dimension, it seemed, and stuck it in her mouth. "Now, back on your feet." Rias and Akano. "So, Rias." Akano spoke to the crimson-haired beauty who she'd be training. "I'm curious. What kind of magic do you specialize in? Or in general? Do you do magic at all?" "Well, yes. I do," Rias replied. "I'm good at healing magic, teleportation magic, magic circle shields, and sleep-inducing magic. Though I specialize in the power of destruction." "I see," Akano replied, thinking for a moment. "Why sleep-inducing magic, though? Seems a bit out of left field." "Oh, my queen has a sacred gear that sometimes causes her to go out of control," Rias replied. "I have to put her to sleep in order to snap her out of it." "Fair enough," Akano replied. "But with sleep magic, teleportation magic, and your power of destruction, though that doesn't exactly count as magic, per se, but it could still work." "Why?" Rias asked. "Where are you going with this?" "I just got an idea," Akano replied. "You'll be fighting Riser Phoenix in a raiding game, I'm told. Which means you'll be fighting in an arena of sorts, correct?" "Yes," Rias replied. "All raiding games, of all kinds, take place in an arena." "Why do you ask?" "We tilde," Akano replied, drawing out the word with her sexy as hell voice. "I think it's better if I show you, isn't it?" Akano pointed at the space right below Ria's feet, and for a second, nothing happened. However, Rias felt the ground becoming slightly hot beneath her feet, and she looked down to see a light yellow magic circle appearing below her feet. In a surprising show of physical agility, Rias jumped into the air, and dodged the blast of lightning that burst from the magic circle, and landed behind it, glaring at Akano, who giggled. "What the hell was that?" Rias cried. "That could have really hurt." "Yes. And it would have given me such a rush tilde," Akano replied, licking her fingers seductively. "But anyway. My idea was that while in the raiding game with Riser, you could layer concentrated bursts of sleep magic, teleportation magic, and your power of destruction, around the raiding game field, like a minefield, to, well, put Riser's peerage members to sleep, teleport them away from your base, or just destroy them entirely." "What?" Rias blinked. "How do you expect me to learn how to do that in a week?" Right as Rias said that, a pale blue magic circle appeared right below her feet, and she suddenly found herself frozen to the ground she stood on, in a block of ice, with only her head exposed to the world. "You forget, Rias tilde," Akano replied, giggling in a slightly sadistic tone, as the ice began to melt around Rias. Once it fully melted, Rias became acutely aware that her school uniform was wetter than the pussy of an unsatisfied MILF in every porno ever. "I have about 6 months to train you, more or less tilde." Line break. At the end of the first month in inside the chamber terms of training that Rias and her peerage had been put through, and after an extremely good meal cooked for them and brought into the time chamber for them to eat by Akano, Azane Hyodo pulled on a pajama tank top emblazoned with the words, "Sleepy Girl," along with a set of short pajama shorts, provided by Roxas in the small house, so small that it looked like little more than a shed from the outside that had been created specifically for her to rest in. She climbed into a large, queen-sized bed which she could only assume had been moved into the shed by Roxas beforehand, pulled the covers over herself and closed her eyes, inwardly sighing at how comfortable the bed was. As the current host of D-Drake felt herself drifting off, she tiredly reflected on the training that she had had with Tobio Ikus. The focus of the training was in speed training, and the current host of the Inagami of the Black Blade hadn't held back in making sure that Azane got as fast as she could. Overall, though she knew that the training would continue, and that she could barely walk from how hard she'd been trained, Azane was happy with the training she had received so far, and that she was able to keep up with Tobio, who was apparently incredibly strong and fast, even by supernatural standards when he was coming at her semi-seriously. Even if that was only in short bursts, it was still a good thing, as in a life or death fight like the raiding game was intended to simulate, Azane would need as much of an advantage over her hypothetical opponents as she could get, even without the boosted gear. With this thought in mind, Azane's head hit the pillow, and the current hostess of D-Drake was asleep at once. In seemingly seconds, Azane felt herself waking up again, but she wasn't in the large bedroom of Roxas's Greek villa that she had fallen asleep in. In short, she was in a completely white space. And by completely white space, I'm not kidding. The entire room, that was the closest description that Azane could come up with, was white, along with the furniture. However, there appeared to be no one here. Not one person was sat on any of the furniture that littered this area. Hello. Azane blinked, and looked around. What's going on? There was no response. Where am I? Azane asked, not expecting a response. This is kinda creeping me out. Still, no response. Diedreg. Azane called. You here? For the third time, no response. Hello. Azane called, drawing out the word, and expecting even less of a response than the one he already got. That made it all the more shocking when he heard a soft, melodious female voice speak, right behind him. Hello. Azane gave a shriek of surprise, and jumped. Whirling around, her eyes set upon a beautiful-looking young woman, who had long, wavy blonde hair and a slim, yet voluptuous, figure. She wore a purple dress, and a head accessory. Her eyes flicking to the woman's breasts, and then back into her light green eyes, Azane found her voice. Hello. She replied. Who are you? And where am I? Well, to answer your first question, Azane Hyodo. The woman replied. My name is Elsha. Nice to meet you. And secondly, believe it or not, you're inside the boosted gear. Inside the boosted gear. Azane repeated, wholly confused, while mentally acknowledging that she had heard Elsha's name before, coming from Diedreg. Am I still asleep? Because I distinctly. Oh, you're asleep, all right. Elsha replied, gesturing that Azane sit down on a sofa, which she did, with the blonde beauty sitting next to him. This is just your unconscious mind talking to me. Then, why am I here? Azane asked. Elsha chuckled. Well, I just wished to talk to you about a couple of things that have been happening, since I haven't checked in with you for a few days. She replied. I like to have a look at the lives of my successors, every once in a while. Your successors? Azane repeated. Wait. Diedreg mentioned your name. Are you a previous host of the boosted gear? I am. Elsha replied. Not to brag, but I'm known as the second strongest host, the strongest female host, of the boosted gear that there's ever been, behind Belzard. Azane's jaw dropped, and Elsha let out a chuckle. Yeah. Elsha replied. Anyway. Her smile became slightly smaller. When I checked in with you just now, and had a look at the past few days, I found that you, or to be more exact, your master, Roxas Gremory, have found themselves under the tutelage of one Roxas Gremory. I must say, she muttered. I never expected Roxas to be the type to train someone, or agree to have them trained. Azane blinked. You sound as if you knew Roxas. She spoke. Wait, Diedreg said once that you got involved with him. And he's right. Elsha replied, sighing. Roxas, a day doesn't go by that I don't miss him. Miss him? Azane blinked. Were you together? Oh, sorry. Elsha replied. I'm just rambling. And to answer your question, Azane, Roxas and I were together, yes. In the sense that we were boyfriend and girlfriend, that is. Chapter 8. Anything you recognize isn't mine. You and Roxas were together. Azane asked, blinking. How long ago was this? Oh, about 200 years ago. Elsha asked. Actually, no. It was 225, closer to that. Ah. Azane replied. Not to pry, but how long were you together for? We dated for 3 years. Elsha replied. It was really, really nice, too. The two of us really loved each other's company, we confided everything in each other, and the cuddles were amazing. Elsha gave a warm, reminiscent smile, and looked at Azane. Though one slight disagreement we had was over me wanting to hold out on having sex with him until we got married. I see. Azane replied. Did that cause any problems? Was that why you? Oh, no. Elsha replied. That little snag never caused us any problems. We still loved each other, but... What? Azane said, slightly insistently. Well, one sparring session we had, we sometimes sparred with each other, just to keep each other in shape, it went wrong. Elsha replied. It really went wrong. Caused Roxas to leave and everything in the aftermath too. She looked down at the ground, and sighed. I was in my balance breaker armor, the strongest natural form that the boosted gear, and most sacred gears, can access and fighting against Roxas, but he ended up destroying my armor with his power of destruction. Damn. Azane replied, suddenly realizing in her mind that she had found a possible reason beyond the one he gave at the Gremory Manor to not use the power of destruction. Did it hurt? Well, the armor getting wrecked by Roxas's incredible natural talent in his father's famous power didn't hurt me that much. Elsha replied. But one of the larger shards of the armor that got destroyed pierced one of my lungs. That hurt. Azane winced, and instinctively put her hand over the side of her chest, where her own lungs were. Ouch. She whispered. That must have been horrible. But, why did Roxas leave after that? God knows. Elsha replied, sighing. But if I know Roxas, his reason for leaving is probably because he didn't want to hurt me any more than he did. Azane was silent for a moment, before speaking. Was that what killed you? She asked. Is that how you died? Getting punctured in the lung by a piece of your own armor? No. Elsha replied. Well, not directly, anyway. I survived getting my lung punctured, but only thanks to a few quick spells. One to remove the shard of armor from my lung, one to close the wound in my lung, and another to stop the bleeding. But, once I had managed to teleport myself home and heal myself up to the closest to full health I could get. Roxas was gone. Gone. Azane blinked. Gone. Elsha repeated. I looked for him in all the usual places in the human world, and a couple of places in the underworld that he liked to go, but I couldn't find him anywhere. She gave another sigh. I didn't survive very long after that. Elsha remarked. I came across a stray devil a couple of days later, and, well, you can guess how that ended. Elsha. I'm so sorry. Azane whispered. Getting torn apart by a stray devil, that must have been horrible. It was. It definitely was rather horrible. Elsha replied. It was horrible, but also rather ironic. She gave a giggle. The second strongest host of the boosted gear, torn apart by a simple stray devil. No better definition of going out with a whimper than that, huh? Yeah. Azane replied. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Elsha replied. I know what you're thinking, Azane, and I don't have any bad feelings towards Roxas for what happened. It wasn't his fault. Azane was silent at Elsha's words, before she spoke again. Do you, see Roxas again? I honestly wish I could. Elsha replied. But as much as I want to, there's no way that I'll be able to come back to the world of the living. I'm dead, and my soul is sealed inside this gear. Azane hummed. Anyway. Elsha replied, a smile on her face. Enough of that. I didn't just call you down here to tell my silly sob story, Azane. I also called you down here because I'm interested in my most recent successor becoming as strong as she can get. Where are you going with this exactly? Azane blinked. Oh, I'm just going to give you a couple of pointers with the boosted gear. Elsha replied, giggling. I should think that being the second strongest wielder would be good at giving a tip or two to the present wielder. Line break. Month 2. Kiba and Roxas. There was a blinding flash of sparks as one of Kiba's swords clashed with the sword that Roxas was using, which was just a normal sword made entirely out of the primordial power of darkness. Roxas didn't move from his spot, but Kiba found himself flying backwards. He landed on his feet, and two swords appeared, one in each hand. One seemed to be made of fire, and the other out of ice. Giving a yell of rage, Kiba ran at Roxas again, fully intending to cut him up. The Soul Knight of Roxas Gremory was currently incredibly angry, as ever since Roxas had mentioned that cursed word, Excalibur, Kiba had been bombarded with the memories of the horrible deaths of his friends in that horrible church. The images of his friends inhaling such a great amount of poisonous gas while he ran away, fatigued and hardly able to breathe, the temper of the rather polite and caring knight boiled over into extreme rage. Roxas regarded Kiba with disdain, and simply swiveled around when Kiba came close enough to him, kicking him in the back and sending him down to the ground. Spitting blood from his mouth, Kiba jumped back to his feet and rushed at Roxas, creating a huge two-handed demonic sword that emitted an ominous, destructive aura. Come on, Roxas! Kiba screamed, running at Roxas far slower than he was used to. Show me that fucking holy sword, so I can destroy it. Well, if you insist. Roxas replied, sighing. As Kiba continued to run at him, Roxas pulled his hairband out of his hair, which appeared as a sword, and swung once. Galatine clashed with Kiba's sword, destroying it on the spot, and the shock of such a simple attack sent Kiba sprawling onto the ground. That, Roxas remarked, coldly, was terrible, Kiba. Quote. Kiba gave a growl from his position on the ground, and tried to get to his feet, but Roxas pointed Excalibur Galatine at his throat, making sure to keep him down there. Why you expect me to just stay down here? Kiba growled. When I'm faced with one of the swords I want to destroy most in the world. The very sword that cost me and my friends our lives. What are you tall? Roxas blinked, and then remembered something that he had been told by Gabriel. About something that had happened around 10 years ago. Oh. So it's you, Isaiah. Kiba was so momentarily shocked at the realization that Roxas knew his original name that he didn't hurl more insults at Roxas for using the sword that he did. Yeah, I know what happened to you, Isaiah. Roxas spoke, quietly. The great Seraph Gabriel told me all about the Holy Sword Project, and how you had to suffer through it. And though my words will doubtless mean nothing to you, I'm sorry. Quote. Roxas took his sword away from Kiba's throat, and turned it back into a hairband, and tied his hair up again. He then offered his hand to the blonde wannabe Casanova, and pulled him to his feet. Kiba, though he looked suspiciously at Roxas, didn't look like he was going to pull out a sword and try to cut him up at a moment's notice. Anyway. Roxas replied. If I might make a suggestion, Kiba, why don't you try to put it behind you? I can't see being angry at the Holy Sword Project doing you any good. Why should I? Kiba asked. All it's done is cause me and my friends who died unending misery, and I can't change it. Roxas cut in. If time travel was possible, which it isn't, I wouldn't recommend going back to stop yourself and your friends from dying at the hands of that project. Not only would it probably break a fourth-dimensional law or 20, just like going back in time to take the virginity of some slutty present MILF and father her child would, but that's beside the point. Kiba was silent as Roxas kept talking. Kiba, think for a second. When you died as a result of the Holy Sword Project, and died in the exact way you did, by presumably inhaling a dose of Zyklon B and or chloroform into your system, what happened? I was saved by Rias. Kiba replied. She made me into her knight. Indeed. Roxas replied. And has your experience as Ria's knight been good or bad? Good, definitely. Kiba replied, slightly more defiantly than he would have liked. I, the sword of Roxas Gremory, respect Rias and Mirajan as my king and queen, respectively, along with seeing them as sisters I never had. Kaneko, while a little closed off from the world, is very nice, and a good friend, and Azane is quite nice. I can't imagine life without them, but, Roxas, where are you going with this? Well, let me ask you something else, Kiba. Roxas replied. Did you ever stop to think, even once, in the 20 years that have happened since the Holy Sword Project ended, that it was the catalyst that set off you getting reincarnated as a devil, and meeting the people who you view as the siblings you never had? The people who, in your words, you can't imagine life without. Kiba looked down. I never thought of it that way. Thought not. Roxas replied. So, Kiba, though I empathize with your anger at the Holy Sword Project, how about you channel your anger at it in a different direction? Like, I dunno, into trying to become as strong as you can possibly be, so you can be a better, sword of Roxas Gremory. Kiba looked thoughtful for a second, before adopting a resolute look on his face. I'll try. He replied. Good man. Roxas replied. He created a sword out of the primordial power of darkness. Now that we've got that mushy shit out of the way, let's get back to training, sword birther. I got a few ideas as to some special swords you can create. Line break. So, how's everyone's training going? Palutena asked, as she sat down, a few feet away, and watched Rias and her peerage eat dinner, or rather, a picnic dinner, prepared by Akano and Asia inside the dimension they were in. After the dinner, Rias and her peerage would have a mock fight against each other for around half a week, before they went to bed. What have you been doing for the past 2 months? I've been doing magical training with Akano. Rias replied. She's helping me create a magical mind field, with a combination of power of destruction and sleeping magic. Ria's peerage gave small noises of interest through their food. Mira. Palutena asked. Valian's helping me with my sacred gear. Mirajan replied. She's been helping me with using my different forms of it, and helping me control myself while in said forms. Akasha's been helping me with kicking in a fight. Kaneko replied. She's considering teaching me Savat. What's? Azane asked, but Palutena answered the question of the current host of Dedrag before she could finish asking it. Martial art. Originated at around the beginning of the 19th century in France. Roxas is exceptional at it. Oh. Azane replied, nodding. So, what have you two done for training? Palutena asked, turning to Kiba and Azane. My husband didn't carve you up into pieces, I see, Kiba. No, he didn't. Kiba replied. He's actually been really nice. Roxas has given me some ideas as to some new swords I can create with sword birth. Like a lightning sword, one that controls gravity, and one that controls other swords. Cool. Palutena replied. And Azane. Tobio's been giving me some pointers in magic, and he's helping me with speed and stamina. Azane replied. Even with those weights on, I feel a lot stronger. Well, when you take them off, on the day of the rating game with Riser, and after you win, you might have to work on restraining your newfound strength. I remember Roxas not doing so, and well. She shrugged. I won't go into that. Quote. Rias and her peerage continued eating their dinner for another 5 minutes, before Rias spoke up after finishing her sandwich. Speaking of Roxas, Palutena, do you know where he might be? Rias asked. Oh, Roxas. Palutena repeated. He said he's going to see some friends of his. In the Gregory. The Gregory. Rias blinked. You mean the fallen angel organization that accounts for around 95% of all known fallen angels? Why would Roxas associate with them? What other Gregory do you think I refer to, Rias? Palutena asked, slightly sarcastically and also slightly playfully. And Roxas would probably associate with them because their, arguably, highest-ranking female member is one of his wives, even if she is his first cousin once removed. Palutena took a bottle of Coca-Cola, opened it, and took a drink. He probably went to see her. She remarked. Or he's hanging around with the team of humans that have allied themselves with the Gregory. Or he's getting chased around by Shuri because she, somehow the only woman who's actually able to scare him, wants to incorporate him into the kinky as fuck games that she plays with her husband, Barakil. Quote. The green-haired goddess gave a shrug, and noticed Rias, who looked slightly disappointed at the realization that wherever Roxas was, there was one place that he wasn't at and that place was here. Who knows what he's doing? Line break. It transpired that the second possibility of the three that Palutena had stated was the closest to the truth. He was sat on a stool, which was pulled up to a counter, and having a drink poured for him by Tobio Ikus, who worked as a bartender at the bar Roxas was sat in, known as the Black Dog Bar, while he strummed the opening melody to the song, Buried Alive, by Avenged Sevenfold, on an acoustic guitar, that while old, was still in good condition. Thanks again for agreeing to help out with Azane's training, Tobio. Roxas thanked his best male friend, as he paused, took the glass, and downed it in one go. I owe you one, mate. The black-haired bartender gave a shrug. No problem, Roxas. Tobio replied as Roxas returned to his playing. Just returning the favor for all the times you help us out when we go to deal with supernatural threats. Like those few vampires in Ireland, though that didn't go as well as it should have. Tell me about it. Roxas chuckled, as he switched to the opening riff of Enter Sandman, by Metallica. Gregory's top task force, the son of the current Lucifer, Helsing's ultimate weapon and the most famous vampire slayer of all time, in the same place, at the same time. How long are those odds? Probably as short as the odds were of it turning into a bloodbath. Tobio replied, smartly, as he poured Roxas another drink. Even if it didn't. You sure you don't want anything stronger? Yeah, I'm sure. Roxas replied, as he paused again and took a drink. I might be strong enough to give Azazel and Barakil a run for their money in a fight, but I'm not a drunk pervert. Or a cuck. Fair enough. Tobio replied, as Roxas drank a bit more of his drink. The door to the bar then swung open, with 4 individuals walking in. The first individual was a handsome man, with the appearance of a delinquent, and with a white cat sitting on his shoulder, which he was stroking lightly. The second person was a beautiful young woman, with brown hair tied to her back. She wore an agent uniform. The third person was also a good-looking young woman, who had brown hair tied into short twin tails, with the rest of it going down to just below her shoulders. She wore a casual shirt and jeans. The fourth individual was a woman whose beauty outdid that of the second and third individuals, several times over. She was a European-looking woman who appeared to be around 20 years old, around the same physical age as Roxas. Her golden blonde hair flowed all the way down to just above her thighs, and her sapphire blue eyes seemed to glow, and light up the bar, whose lights were slightly dimmed. She wore gray magician's robes, with a hood, which was pulled down. Respectively, these people were Kuki Samahima, Natsumi Minagawa, Sei Tuju, and Lavinia Reni. They were all members of the Slash Dog team, which was founded and led by Tobio. Hey, everyone. Tobio remarked to his team members. Glad you could make it. Everyone on the team greeted Tobio and Roxas, who greeted them back, while putting the guitar back into a pocket dimension, as he was on friendly terms with all of them and made their way up to the bar, and sitting down. With the exception of Lavinia, everyone ordered drinks of their own, with Lavinia just shifting her stool closer to Roxas and laying a gentle hand on top of his own. It's been a while since you joined us, Rox. Lavinia spoke, gently, with her eyes meeting Roxas's own. How've you been? Pretty good. Roxas replied, as he drank the rest of his drink, and looked back at Lavinia. You? Oh, I've been good. Lavinia replied, her hand slowly making its way up Roxas's arm. You're looking pretty good tonight, you know. Thanks. Roxas replied, smiling. It was pretty hard for someone to not smile when Lavinia was around. You always seem to, yourself, Lavinia. Ah tilde, Kuki remarked, slightly teasingly, with a light alcoholic drink in hand. Relationship goals tilde, Roxas responded by throwing the rest of his drink, which was only a bit, onto Kuki's face. Shut up, Kooky. Roxas groaned, though he couldn't stop himself from laughing, which in turn, couldn't stop the other 5 individuals around from laughing. After everyone stopped, he went back to talking with Lavinia, for about half an hour, until he stood up. Well, I gotta get going. Roxas remarked, to everyone. See you tomorrow, Tobio. Put it on my tab. See ya, Roxas. Tobio leant over the counter and fist-bumped Roxas. And I'll make sure to. Quote. Before the silver-haired Nephalem walked out of the bar, he felt a pair of soft arms wrapping around him from behind, in a warm embrace. Bye, Rox. Lavinia bade Roxas goodbye. I hope I can see you again soon. Why yeah. Roxas replied, going slightly pink, and smiling slightly at the feeling of Lavinia's large breasts pressing up against his back. See you, Lavinia. Quote. As Roxas left the bar, and magic circled away, Lavinia took her seat back at the bar, and Tobio remarked, smiling slightly. You like him, don't you? Now it was Lavinia's turn to go slightly pink, as 2 individuals walked into the bar, both fallen angels. The first fallen angel to walk in had the appearance of a middle-aged, gruff-looking man, with short black hair, matching beard, and a muscular body. He wore a dark green robe, with what appeared to be high-tech body armor underneath. This was Barakiel, a high-ranking cadre in the Gregory. He was a 10-winged fallen angel, though his wings were hidden right now. The second person was a woman that appeared to be in her late 20s. Her hair was jet black, and her eyes were green. She wore a shrine maiden's outfit. This was Shuri Himahima, Barakiel's wife and Fallen Saints Queen. The Fallen Saints had been developed as a result of the Alliance Treaty, signed by representatives of both Gregory and Heaven, as a counterpart to the Brave Saints, Heaven's system of creating new angels in the absence of the possibility of Palutena being able to create angels, like her father had done and the mother of Akano Himahima. Tobio looked up from the bar after serving Lavinia some fruit juice. Oh, hey Barakiel, Shuri. Tobio greeted his aunt and uncle. Shuri, before you ask, Roxas isn't here. He just left about a minute ago. Damn. Shuri muttered. I wanted to talk to Roxas about something. Oh, I wonder what about. Tobio thought, dryly. Line break. Month 3. Mirajan and Valian. Excellent, Mirajan. Valian whispered, just loud enough for Ria's queen to hear her, as the white-haired wielder of Take Over sat, cross-legged, with her hands folded at her lap, eyes closed, in deep meditation, while Valian sat opposite to her. Deep breath. Mirajan did as instructed, heaving a slow, deep sigh, feeling a new wave of relaxation overtake her. Very good. Valian whispered. You're a natural at this. Quote. Quiet dominated the air around them, settling down on the 2 sacred gear wielders, as thick as the snow got during a Russian winter. Minutes passed. On. Valian muttered. Open your eyes. On command, Mirajan opened her blue eyes, and took a breath. Thanks, Valian. Ria's queen spoke. I'm surprised that I've never explored the possibility of meditating before. Quote. Well, given that Ria's peerage seemed to rely on power, I'm not surprised that anyone hasn't thought of taking a more supportive option in battle, especially when you all, with the possible exception of Kiba, have the potential to. Valian replied. You chief amongst them, since in raw magical power, I can sense you outmatch Rias, who prefers to use her power of destruction, and only resorts to magic when the power of destruction doesn't work. Or when she needs to subdue you. Quote. That's right. Mirajan replied. She learned sleep-inducement magic for that very reason. Yeah, I guessed as much. Valian remarked. Anyway, meditation is a much better, and far more healthy option, for controlling a sacred gear, especially one like yours, that has such a high potential for its wielder to go out of control. Indeed. Mirajan replied. Since I have a stray devil, a demonic dragon and a demonic elf sealed inside this gear. Valian nodded, and stood up. Yeah. The silver-haired descendant of Lucifer replied. Now. How about a quick spar? Sure. Mirajan replied, and before Valian's eyes, a dark light seemed to come over her, and over time, it slowly began to become more intense. Once it cleared, in a large, dark explosion, a different-looking Mirajan stood before Valian, who spread her 8 devil wings. Mirajan's eyes had become darker, and her eyelashes had grown larger, with a dark, thin marking in a light zigzag style vertically crossing her right eye. Similar markings were present above her right breast, and on both of her bare thighs. Her hair had become wilder, jutting upwards while getting curlier, with her front ponytail growing longer. Her ears had enlarged, extending backwards and getting pointed edges. She also gained sharp, canine teeth, and her lips seemed to have become covered in dark lipstick. Her forearms and hands had received noticeable changes, becoming covered in scales and each sprouting a fin-like protrusion on its outer side. She also grew a large, stocky tail that seemed to be made of metal plates or scales, getting smaller and smaller near its end. Myra's clothing had also changed, with her school uniform being replaced by a dark, skimpy one-piece suit, which revealed her arms and legs, and was open on the front and back, exposing most of her belly and large cleavage. Her clothing had golden-colored edges taking on spiky shapes, and her similarly spiky collar was tied around the neck by a cravat tie. Her shoulders were tied in thin belts protruding from her one-piece suit, and her feet were covered by matching, high-heeled thigh-high boots, which were decorated by lighter motifs on their upper parts, taking on the shapes of jagged blades pointing downwards on the front of her thighs. She also donned a pair of gauntlets covering the back parts of her transformed arms. Mirajan, after spreading her 6 devil wings, flew at Valian and attempted to wrap her tail around her, but Valian flew out of the way, and snapped her fingers. A magic circle opened in front of her, and a large shard of ice flew from it, and it was bang on course to hit Mirajan, if she hadn't countered with a wave of boiling water, which melted the ice shard on contact. Mirajan flew at Valian, and attempted to claw at her face, but Valian teleported backwards a few yards, and flung a blast of lightning at Rhea's white-haired queen. Even when Mirajan extended both her hands and sent a large ball of lightning of her own at Valian to counter the attack, Valian's attack was still powerful enough to hit and damage her, as it was used in combination with the primordial power of darkness, the power that Valian had inherited from her father, Lucifer who inherited it from his father, Levon Lucifer, who inherited it from his father, Valian's great-grandfather, and Roxas's grandfather, Lucifer himself. Valian went on the offensive now. She flew forward in the blink of an eye, and grabbed Mirajan's head, before slamming it into her knee to stun her. Valian then delivered a mid-air spin kick to the side of Mirajan's head, sending her flying to the side. When Mirajan tried to create a number of magic circle shields to stop Valian from hitting her anymore, Valian just flew forward, and in a few seconds, had punched through them all faster than Mirajan could make them, and delivered a devastating punch to Rhea's white-haired queen, sending her down to the ground. Mirajan shakily got back to her feet, flickering between her original Satan soul form and her normal form, before settling on her normal form and collapsing backwards onto the ground, panting heavily. Well, at least I didn't have to divide your strength this time, Valian remarked, landing back on the ground, without a scratch on her body, or even a ruffle on her clothing. Come here, Mira. I'll heal you. Quote. Mirajan got back to her feet, trembling slightly, and walked over to Valian, who extended her hands and let a dark aura come from her hands, which began to heal Mirajan's wounds. Man, thanks, Valian. Mirajan muttered. Though I didn't think the primordial power of darkness was a healing power. It can do anything that the user imagines. Including healing. Valian replied. But it's the only Devil Clan power exclusive to those with Lucifer's blood in their veins, rather than one that can be learned, like the power of destruction, or emulated, like the demonic aquakinesis of the Sexier clan. I see. Mirajan replied, as Valian finished healing her wounds. Rheas and Roxas. So, Rheas. Roxas sat down, at his ease, close to Rheas, on the edge of a river inside the training dimension. Tell me. Do you have any ideas for what you're going to do during the raiding game with Riser? Tactics-wise, that is. Well. Rheas replied. I always imagined having more than 5 peerage members for my first raiding game, but for this match, I think Kiba and Azane would be a good forward offensive force, with Mirajan supporting them from above, possibly. Roxas replied. And what about yourself and Kaneko? Well, if the worst came to it, I would have to come out and fight, but if I did, I think Kaneko would be a possible guard for me. Rheas replied. Kaneko could easily keep me safe from any of Riser's peerage. Hopefully, that is. Roxas blinked, before shaking his head. No. He replied. Bad idea, Rheas. 1. I think having a guard for you is a bad idea on principle, since it'd render you and your peerage less able to do things in a fight. And 2, if you really want to have a guard for you, don't let it be your rook. Why not? Rheas asked, looking up at her nephew. Castling. Roxas replied, simply. Once he'd said that word, Rheas blinked, and then facepalmed. Fuck. She whispered. I didn't think of that. Yeah. Roxas replied. Picture yourself in a fight with Riser, with Kaneko as your guard by your side. He's kicking your ass, and he's about to retire you, rendering the game, along with your status as a sexy single devil lady, finished. Rheas blushed at Roxas's wording, but stayed silent. So, you decide to castle to get out of that situation. Roxas replied. And you castle with Kaneko, leaving her to take the attack for you. However, you end up only a couple of feet away from Riser, where he can easily burn you. See what I'm getting at? Why yes, of course. Rheas replied. But I don't want to leave Kaneko to take an attack that was meant for me. That doesn't seem right. Rheas, it doesn't matter. Roxas replied. Cruel as it might sound, you don't have to care about your servants during the raiding game. They can go out there and get their asses destroyed, and they'd get nursed back to full health after the game is over, so you don't have to worry about their health. Quote. Rias glared slightly at Roxas for his callous words about her and her cute servants, but her glare paled in the face of the glare that Roxas returned with. It's your call, whether or not you want to use every way possible to win your match, Rias. Roxas remarked. I don't suffer any consequences, whether you win or lose. I'm just here to train you. You do understand that, right? Why yes, I understand. Rias replied, inclining her head. Sorry, Roxas. But I kinda structured my entire raiding game strategy around having Kaneko as a guard. So, I'll have to come up with an entirely new one. Hey, that's alright. Roxas replied, a small smirk overcoming his features. I'll help you out, Rias. Rias blushed slightly, as she and Roxas began bouncing possible ideas for the raiding game off each other. Even if you're my nephew, Roxas. Rias thought, as her blue eyes took in Roxas's body, which was the product of centuries of training, I wouldn't mind you helping me out in a different way, Tilda. Line break. Mount Olympus. Unarguably, one of the most famous mythical places in the supernatural world, and home to the Olympic pantheon, are Greek gods. One of these Greek gods in particular was flying up the mountain, right to the very top, where the king and queen of the Greek gods were. This particular god appeared to be a middle-aged man with an athletic figure, which was slim and fit. He had curly hair which was a mix of black and gray, blue eyes and rather elfish features. He wore nothing but a pair of shorts, along with a pair of winged sandals and a winged hat. This was Hermes, the messenger of the gods. He had just seen something that he thought some of the higher-ups of the pantheon, particularly the queen, would be interested in, and had decided to return to Olympus to inform them of it. When Hermes reached the top of Mount Olympus, and landed on the top plateau, and bowed before the three gods that stood before him. The first god was an old, tall, muscular white-haired man. His eyes were an electric blue, and he wore a white toga and golden arm guards. Electricity seemed to sparkle across his body. The second god was a very beautiful woman, who had shoulder-length emerald green hair, a face of regal beauty, and brown eyes. She wore a dress that seemed to shimmer in color, and a pair of sandals. The third god had the appearance of a friendly-looking elderly man, with a well-built muscular body. He had whitish blue hair, turquoise eyes, and he wore a white and blue toga. Rise, Hermes. Zeus, the king of the Greek gods, and the god of the sky, thunder, lightning and the heavens, ordered his son. It isn't often you travel to Olympus. No, it isn't, Lord Zeus. Hermes replied. However, I have news that you may take interest in. Oh. Zeus raised an eyebrow. And what news would this be? Your stepdaughter and her husband. Hermes replied. They've taken up residence in Greece, to the southeast of here. Quote. Zeus and Poseidon looked at each other, and shared a look. Personally, neither the king of the Greek gods nor his brother, the god of the seas, had any feelings for or against Roxas and Palutena, other than Zeus acknowledging that Roxas, as a Nephalem, a species that, prior to the balance of holy and demonic powers being downright ended, thanks to the deaths of the god of the Bible and of Lucifer, couldn't have existed, had potential to become one of the most powerful beings in the world, perhaps. Coming to rival the more powerful of the Olympic pantheon, such as Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus himself. However, Hera, the wife and sister of Zeus, the Olympic goddess of marriage and women, did have a reaction. A very, very unpleasant reaction. What the fuck? She shouted. I thought I told that bastard of mine to never spoil Greek soil ever again, after our previous meeting. Lady Hera, aren't you overreacting? Poseidon asked of his sister-in-law and queen, before turning to Hermes. Hermes, are Roxas and Palutena doing anything that could threaten the Greek pantheon? Negative, Lord Poseidon. Hermes replied. All I saw them doing was moving into a recently brought villa in the southeast, along with a half-fallen angel, a vampire, a nekosho and a half-devil. So that prideful, silver-haired grandson of Lucifer sleeping around with women other than his wife. Hera yelled. Has my bastard daughter no shame? As Hermes silently left the scene, Zeus and Poseidon gave a simultaneous sigh, as they let Hera rage about something along the lines of Palutena, her bastard daughter who is unworthy to inherit the powers of the ruler of marriage, not being allowed to live on Greek soil. It was just easier to let her rave on. Even if she could go on for days at times. Line break. Month 4. At the start of her month or so of training, Kaneko came out of the magic circle that Roxas had sent her through. By instinct, she immediately shifted herself into a combat stance, waiting for Akasha to come out of nowhere and attack her, which was how she usually started their training sessions. However, after 5 seconds, which was the usual time it took for Akasha to start attacking, there was no sign of her. No sound of her, either. Not even a scent of her. Hello, Sharon, NYA. Kaneko instantly froze, and whipped around at the voice coming from behind her. Right there, sitting on a tree branch, and lazily swinging her legs, and smiling down at her, was Kuroka. Chapter 9. Anything you recognize isn't mine. Month 4. Kaneko and Kuroka. Kuroka. Kaneko muttered, as in one graceful move, her older sister jumped down from the tree branch she was sat on, and landed on the ground, right in front of Kaneko. You're here. Quote. Yes, I am, Nya. Kuroka replied, caringly smiling at Kaneko. And I know what you're thinking. But just let me explain. Kaneko instantly rushed at Kuroka, her pent-up rage at her older sister for doing what she'd done to their former master gushing out. She raised her fist with full intent to punch Kuroka as hard as she could, but Kuroka was too quick for her. She raised her hand and created a magic circle shield, though her magic circle looked a lot more like an octagon than a circle, to block Kaneko's punch, and teleported aside, out of the way of Kaneko's punch. Kuroka, why? Kaneko shouted, as she rushed back at Kuroka and tried to punch her again. Why did you do it? Our previous master was the one who gave us a home, and you killed him. Yes, that's true, Sharon. Kuroka replied, as she cast a concentrated blast of senjutsu at her younger sister, in order to get her to back off from throwing another punch. But there's more to it than that. What more could there possibly be? Kaneko shouted, running at Kuroka and attempting to kick her in the side, but being blocked again. You killed our master, became a stray devil, and you almost indirectly caused me to be executed. What could there possibly be to add to that? Kuroka would have replied instantly, but she had to block a few more of Kaneko's punches and kicks in very quick succession. She'd heard a lot about how her little sister had been training herself during the past few months, and she very much wanted to go to her as soon as she could, so she could talk things out quickly with her. However, Roxas had stopped her, instead instructing her to wait. She remembered the conversation she'd had 3 nights before, with Roxas. Flashback. Why do I have to wait, Roxas, Nya? A naked Kuroka asked, after a very long, very hot session of passionate mating. I really need to talk to my little Sharon, Nya. I know that, Kuroka. Roxas replied, as he let Kuroka shift herself closer to him. But Kaneko's just gotten here, and is getting her ass handed to her on a silver platter by Akasha as we speak. Having her big sister, who, for all she knows, maliciously killed her master and began life as a stray devil, might just wreck her entirely. Kuroka stayed silent, as she thought this over. And I know how much you care for your little sister, Kuroka. Roxas gently scratched behind Kuroka's ears, making her subconsciously purr. I just hope you can see where I'm coming from when I say this. Of course, Nya. Kuroka replied, resting her head on Roxas's chest, in a silent plea for more head scratching, which Roxas was too happy to grant. I just want to talk to her so much, Nya tilde. Indeed. Roxas replied. But also, look at things from her perspective before rushing to talk to her. The Nephalem and the Nekosho lay together in silence for a minute, before Roxas spoke again. Tell you what, Kuroka. I promise you can have a day to talk things out with Kaneko during her training. But it just won't be in the direct future, since right now, the priority for her is training her. Why can't I help train her as well, Nya? Kuroka asked. When we make up, she might be more willing to learn senjutsu, Nya. Fair point. Roxas replied. But my point still stands. Does it sound alright? Sure, Nya. Kuroka replied, before shifting herself so her whole naked body lay on top of Roxas. Now. She licked her lips. Shall we get back to mating, Nya tilde? Flashback end. How about why I did what I did? Kuroka asked, thrusting her hand out and grabbing onto her little sister's fist as she thrust it at her face. Or did you not think about that, Sharon? Of course I did. Kaneko replied, trying to push through Kuroka's grip, but finding herself unable to. You went mad on your power, and killed our master. That's bullshit. Kuroka raised her voice in return, and pushed back, with such force that Kaneko went sprawling to the ground. I never went mad on my power, Sharon. Nekosho can't go mad on their own power. Then why did you kill our master, then? Kaneko shouted in reply. Tell me, please. Oh, I will, Sharon. Kuroka replied, walking slowly towards her little sister, and speaking in a softer tone. Just listen to me when I tell you, because it's the truth, okay? Kaneko hesitantly nodded. Well. Kuroka replied. I heard, while our previous master was alive, that he and his queen planned to become exceptionally powerful, and become an expert in all types of magic, sorcery and everything else, Nya. However, he didn't want to actually go through the hard work that I've heard someone like Roxas has done, to get to that point. Kuroka took a breath, and continued. Some of those powers included the powers of Senjutsu and Yujutsu, powers that you and I, as Nekosho, are naturally proficient in. The big-titted black cat continued. He planned to steal our blood, and use a magical ritual to combine it with his blood, and become more powerful, possibly on the levels of the current four Satans, NYA. Kaneko blinked in surprise. If he'd have gone through with what he wanted to do, we would have both died, Sharon. Kuroka whispered. And I didn't care what happened to me, I just wanted to protect you, my little sister, NYA. Kuroka replied. And if that meant killing our master, then so be it. Tears began to fill up in Kuroka's eyes. I heard about everything that you went through as a result of it, Sharon. And words can't describe how sorry I am to hear of what happened. I just hope that you can forgive me for what I did, NYA. Quote. Kuroka was fully prepared to hear Kaneko continue to turn her down, and end their relationship as siblings for good. She actually made to get up and leave the stretch of field that they were at, but she felt Kaneko's small arms wrapping around her. Sister. Kuroka heard Kaneko whisper. I'm so sorry. You must hate me. What? Kuroka blinked. Don't think for a second that I hate you, Sharon, NYA. I didn't, and I don't now. And I never will. Quote. Kuroka smiled down at her little sister, and her smile became slightly wider when she saw two white cat ears, and white cat tail, appear on Kaneko's body. I can feel that what you said was the truth. Kaneko whispered. I thought I'd sealed my Nekosho instincts for good. That's impossible. Kuroka replied. You can't seal off who you are, Sharon. Unless you want to die exceptionally young, that is, NYA. Quote. The two Nekosho sisters sat, and continued to hug each other, their relationship as siblings rekindled. Kaneko let out a soft, NYA tilde, as Kuroka stroked her hair. Month 5. Kiba, Roxas and Palutena. Hey, Kiba. Roxas greeted the blonde knight after appearing, along with his green-haired goddess of a wife, through a transportation circle. You doing okay? I'm all right, Roxas. Kiba replied, before taking in the sight of Palutena. What is Palutena doing here? Roxas finished for him. Oh, she, and I guess, have something for you. Came straight from heaven. And yes, I do have relations with the angels. I see. Kiba replied. What do you have? Something that, I think, may be very important to you. Roxas replied, nodding to Palutena, who reached into a magic circle and pulled out a blue and white crystal. Had to exploit my connections to certain members of the church, /heaven, and promise Michael something pretty damn important to get a hold of one of these things. What is that thing? Kiba asked, feeling a strong holy aura coming from that crystal. It's a product of the Holy Sword Project. Roxas replied, taking the crystal from Palutena, walking over to Kiba, and handing it to him. According to Michael, it consists of the correct amount of a special gene required to wield a holy sword, taken out from all the subjects of the project. Kiba widened his eyes as he looked down at the crystal in his hand. That means. He whispered. Indeed. Roxas replied, his face neutral. That's all that's left of your comrades of the project. Since you told me a couple of days, or months, ago that you wished that you could have something, anything of your friends, in what was basically the church's equivalent to Auschwitz. Well, there it is. What does it do? Kiba asked, looking tearfully up at both Roxas and Palutena. When given to, and absorbed into, humans, it gives them the ability to wield a holy sword. Palutena replied, her face also neutral. But given that you're a devil, I'm not sure what would happen. Quote. Kiba silently looked down at the crystal in his hand, and cupped it in both of them. Holding it close to his chest, he began to whisper something under his breath, something which Roxas couldn't hear. The hell is he mumbling about? Roxas asked of Palutena. I can't be sure, love. Palutena replied. If I had to guess, it'd probably be something to do with Kiba apologizing to his friends from the Holy Sword Project. Since that crystal is all he has left of them. Quote. After about half a minute, Kiba stopped muttering to himself, and a gray magic circle appeared before him. Roxas widened his eyes at what came out of it. The sword that came from the magic circle didn't just emit a demonic energy, like Kiba's usual swords did, but a holy energy as well. A black and white sword with golden trims, with red runes lighting up across the blade's center on either side, that was about as long as Roxas's Excalibur Galadine, was what appeared. Holding it in two hands, Kiba gave another resolute expression. Nice sword, Kiba. Roxas remarked, stepping forward. Looks like a holy demonic sword, something only possible because of the deaths of the 4 old Satans and the god of the Bible. Kinda like my status as a Nephalem. Roxas pulled out his hairband, and Excalibur Galatine appeared in his hand. But you know, a cool-looking sword is nothing if it is unable to be used properly. Roxas remarked, pointing Excalibur Galatine at Kiba. So. Mind me, the only known holy demonic being alive, being the first being you test that sword, the first holy demonic sword out on. Of course, Roxas. Kiba replied, grinning as he rushed forward to meet Roxas's sword, while Palutena perched on a tree branch to watch her husband fight, while mentally sniggering at how Michael went from rather reluctant to fork over one of the holy sword crystals to extremely willing just when Roxas offered to court Gabriel. Seems Michael's not as pure-hearted as everyone in heaven and the church seem to think he is. Palutena thought, as Roxas and Kiba clashed with each other. Though, then again, even as the daughter of God, I'm a bit of a horndog myself, so I can't talk. Valian and Mira. A silver transportation circle opened next to Mirajan, and Valian Lucifer came out of it. Rhea's white-haired queen noticed that Valian wasn't looking as perfect and classy as she usually looked. Her clothes looked rather ruffled, and she looked like she'd just come out of a large fight. Hey, Mirajan. Valian said, panting slightly. Sorry I'm late. I got caught up in doing something. It's all right, Valian. Mirajan replied. And what were you caught up in doing? You look pretty shaken up. Oh, I'm fine. Valian replied. It was actually about your training. She pointed at the ground, and a magic circle opened up. A magical cage came out of the magic circle, and inside the cage was a creature that looked rather like a humanoid woman. What distinguished this creature from a normal woman was that she was, quite literally, skin and bone. Not an ounce of fat or muscle lay on her body, and she had no breasts to speak of. She wore a pale blue robe, and her eyes were the same color. Her skin was an even lighter blue. Though it seemed to be very injured, it glared at Valian with fury, anger and loathing all rolled into one. What is that, Valian? Mirajan asked. An Allah. Valian replied. Not very well known, but it's a demonic creature from Slavic mythology. My familiar found it for me in the familiar forest. They're known for creating all kinds of horrible weather. Mainly storms, of all kinds. I see. Mirajan replied. But what does You want me to seal that into my sacred gear, don't you? Yup. Valian replied. Seems a good addition to the collection, that consists of a stray devil, demonic dragon and demonic elf, don't you think? Oh okay. Mira replied, getting up and walking over to the cage that housed the Allah, and looked down at her. The Allah hissed up at her, and seemed to spit lightning at her. However, Mira didn't move, and extended her hand out. Valian stepped back as she watched Mira close her eyes, before they suddenly opened, and both her iris and pupils had turned a blinding white, along with her sclera, leaving her eyes as white orbs of sight rather than eyes. A soft, white light came over Mirajan, before it became harder and brighter, and then harder and brighter still, before the light began to engulf the Allah as well. But even with the light engulfing two beings instead of just one, the light continued to become harder and brighter still, until Valian was forced to cover her eyes in order for them to not be hurt. After a few seconds, Valian felt a huge wave of energy outputted from Mirajan, and the white light disappear. Taking her hands away from her eyes, she saw that Mirajan's physical appearance had changed. Her hair, contrary to its neat state before, was very unkempt, and seemed to spark around randomly, as if it itself was electrified. Her eyes still maintained their azure shade of color, but they seemed to become brighter, and shone intensely. Rather than her maroon dress, or her school uniform, Mirajan wore a dark blue sundress that went down to the top of her thighs, and seemed to be very tight around her breasts, which accentuated them. There was also a large cut taken out of the top of the dress, giving view to a lot of her cleavage. She also wore black leather stockings that went up to the bottom of her thighs, along with a pair of dark blue boots. Valian may have been a straight woman whose affections lay squarely with Roxas, her first cousin once removed, but she had to appreciate that Mirajan looked rather beautiful in this form. Don't get her wrong, she looked damn hot in her normal form, but you know. Nice, Mira. Valian remarked, cracking her knuckles. Nice form. Thanks. Mirajan replied, smirking at Valian. I feel really in control of this form, here. Good to know that your meditation has paid off. Valian remarked, stepping forward. Fancy coming at me? Oh, I would love to. Mirajan replied, raising her hand. Valian looked up, and saw that storm clouds had begun to form over the area of the field that they were at. Very suddenly, Valian felt like she'd been punched, extremely hard, in the back of the head. She felt a huge shock go down her body, before it seemed to lock up, and she fell to the ground. UHNNN. Valian groaned, as she got back to her feet. Fuck. My bad. I was not prepared for that, at all. She looked up at Mirajan, who had spread 6 devil wings and was hovering about 30 feet above her. That actually hurt, Mira. Oh, I'm so sorry. Mirajan replied, smiling down at Valian. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that the point of our training? Fair point. Valian replied, as she, ready for an attack this time, raised her hand and created a shield out of ice with her hand, which blocked a second bolt of lightning from Mirajan. But don't expect me to hold back, now that you've gotten in an actual hit on me. Valian herself became overcome with a bright white light, as she jumped into the air. In an instant, the light cleared, and Valian was encased in a white dragon's armor, that had blue jewels set into the armor, along with the pair of white dragon wings on Valian's back, with 8 energy, feathers, that was the original form of the sacred gear. Vanishing Dragon, Balance Breaker. Albion called, from within Valian's sacred gear. Scale Mail. Valian flew at Mirajan, blasting her lightning aside, and gave her a hard punch to the face that sent Rhea's queen flying. However, Mirajan righted herself in midair, and blasted Valian with lightning again. However, the lightning bounced off Valian's armor as she flew at Mira again, with full intent to attack again. However, Mirajan flew backwards, creating a huge sandstorm and launching it at Valian to mask her physical presence. Oh, you want to play this game, do you, Mira? Valian muttered, under her armor. She turned around, and saw Mirajan flying at her from above, before turning around to meet her attack. Line break. It was that night, the night before the raiding game between Rias and Riser, and Roxas Gremory herself was walking towards the hot spring that was situated below the house. Akino had explained to her the night before this one that the large basement under the house, thanks to Palutena, had 3 functions. One was the training chamber that Rias and her peerage had been training in for the past 6 months, the second was that of a hot spring, and the third was that of a sex chamber. Rias had blushed extremely heavily at the thought of the last one, particularly the shit that would go down if she and Roxas were to be alone in such a place, clad in nothing but a towel that covered her breasts and crotch, but very, very little else. As she came closer to the hot spring, Rias looked up, and through the steam that rose from the water, of which she could feel the heat from where she stood, that there was a silhouette of a person sitting on the edge of the spring, relaxing. It was Palutena. Rias gulped to herself, and, thinking that it would be best if she didn't disturb the green-haired deity who, according to Valian, was among the top 15 strongest beings in the world and made to leave the hot spring, thinking that she'd come back in half an hour or so, maybe when Palutena wasn't around. However, her thoughts of possibly being able to slip away from the daughter of God unnoticed were dashed when Palutena spoke up. I know you're there, you know. Quote. Rias gulped, as Palutena stood up, in all her naked glory, and stepped out of the steam, revealing herself fully to Rias. Oh, Rias. Hey. Up for a dip in the hot spring, are we? Yeah. Rias replied. I was actually wondering, where Roxas is. I haven't seen him all day. Not even at breakfast. Who knows? Palutena replied, shrugging as she sat back down. There's a plethora of places that my husband could have gotten to, and even more people that he may be with. From in his lab, working on his next huge invention, to being wrapped up in some high-stakes extreme action adventure, most likely with the Slash-Dog team. She gave a yawn. My husband is a very busy guy, Rias. By the way, come sit down. I've been told. Rias replied, as she walked over to Palutena, shed her towel, revealing her naked body and sat next to her. Wait, Roxas has a lab. He does. Palutena replied. He doesn't use it often, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have an appreciation for science. You know he managed to create a special sun cream for vampires that protects them from sunlight. He did. Rias widened her eyes. That's impressive. Don't vampires die when in direct sunlight? In most cases, yes. Palutena replied. Vampires of a transcendent strength, like Carmilla, Orpheus Tepes and Alucard, are entirely immune to sunlight, as are Dompiers, aka hybrids between vampires and another species, such as devils. Though I am told that a Dampier going into direct sunlight does cause discomfort. Rias gave a slight start at that particular mention. Palutena ignored her. However, when a pure-blooded vampire goes into sunlight, and never goes back into the darkness again, they will expire after a time. She replied. As far as I know, low-class vampires die within several hours, mid-class vampires can take up to a day to die, high-class vampires have been known to stay out in sunlight for weeks, while ultimate-class vampires, like Akasha, can stay in the blazing hot sun, like this Greek sun, for months on end. That answer your question? Yes. Rias replied. Though something like that would be worth. I dunno. Quote. Thousands, if not tens of thousands, of whatever world currency you wish. Palutena asked, smartly. Yeah. However, Roxas doesn't have any desire to sell it to the vampires, as he knows full well that the higher class of the species would never accept it, and the lower class of the species can't afford to take it. That, and there's only one vampire who he'd trust to let use it. Akasha. Rias asked. Right in one, sexy. Palutena replied, grinning, as Rias blushed. Anyway, back on topic, why'd you come asking after my husband, anyway? Rias began to say something, but trailed off. Palutena raised an eyebrow when Rias shot nervous looks at Palutena before focusing on the water below her. Wait a minute. I know that look on your face, and the way you're acting. I've seen it time and time again, with Penemu, with Valian, with Akano, with Akasha, with Kuroka, and even Asia. You fancy Roxas, don't you? Ria's face, which was already pink, slowly turned as red as her hair. Why yes. She whispered. My. Palutena grinned. Beneath that mature and high-class woman is a kinky little aunt who loves her nephew. Who'd have known? She giggled at the look on Ria's face. You're not upset? Rias asked. Palutena stopped giggling after a second, and turned to her. Why would I be? She asked, blinking. Why should I be upset with a woman, a damn sexy one, by the way, who just confessed their feelings for a man that they like? Well, you're his wife. Rias replied. He's married to you, the daughter of the goddess of marriage. Wouldn't you feel at the very least a little pissed off that your aunt-in-law has feelings for your husband, or even, that your husband has lovers other than yourself? Palutena blinked again, before she replied, in a rather softer tone than before. Rias. She spoke. Let me clear a couple of things up first. My mother may be the goddess of marriage, and the being who most humans think of when they think of a marriage deity, but the thing is, Hera, represents the possessiveness a wife has for her husband, which is why, so I've heard from Aphrodite, my great-aunt, Hera is such a colossal bitch to all of Zeus' other lovers, and by extension, the offspring of such infidelity. However, oh, excuse me. Palutena gave a yawn, and continued talking. I guess you could say that I represent the trust between two married partners part of marriage, given that I know that Roxas loved, still loves, and will continue to love, me, despite having lovers other than me. Get what I mean, Rias? Palutena asked, turning to Rias. So now do you see why I'm not upset with you, for just having feelings for Roxas? Why yes, of course. Rias replied. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude. Oh, that's all right. Palutena replied, waving off the apology. You'd be surprised how often I get it. Anyway, her smile became slightly naughtier. Do tell. Have you any particularly sexy fantasies involving Roxas? You don't have to be embarrassed, I've heard pretty much everything. From Penemu and Akano alone. Well, sorry to disappoint. Rias replied, becoming slightly more confident in how she talked, knowing that she was at ease. I don't have many particularly kinky fantasies about Roxas. I was never really the type of person. Oh, well. Palutena shrugged. I guess an aunt wanting to either bone, or get boned by, her nephew is kinky enough. As Palutena shifted her body so she was sat in the water, submerging herself for a second, before coming up again and sitting beside Rias, her voluptuous body glistening from the reflection of being entirely wet, she spoke again, asking Rias directly. Well, anyway. Why do you have feelings for Roxas, Rias? I love his personality. Rias replied, almost instantly. From when I've been around him, I've seen that no matter how many women are in his life, he cares about them all equally, apart from you, possibly. Thank you. Palutena muttered. And I really admire that. Rias replied. It's so different from Riser, the person who I and my peerage are being trained to fight, who doesn't care a bit about the women who he loves, or claims to love. And now I'm engaged to him, and I'm certain that if I get married to him, I won't even have any standing above all his other whores, like his half-succubus queen, two of his pawns who are Necomata sisters, you get the idea. I do. Palutena replied. I've watched Riser and his peerage in DVDs of rating games. Quote. But Roxas. Rias looked down into the water. I may have only known him for a week, while I've known Riser for the best part of 3 years, but I get the impression that Roxas isn't like that, at all. He's kind, seems intelligent in a way similar to Sona, but is nowhere near as serious as her, and, well. Rias subconsciously rubbed her legs together. I won't lie. I love the look of his body. So sculpted and chiseled. But. She trailed off again. I understand, Rias. Palutena replied. And you know, those are all very nice things to say. Thanks, Palutena. Rias replied, as she looked up at Palutena. You know, you're really nice. Palutena grinned at Rias, in a rather un-Palutena-ish kind of way. What's with that grin, Palutena? Rias asked, before blinking. Quote. Wait a minute. Palutena's grin became wider. Roxas. Rias shouted. Palutena laughed hard and disappeared in a cloud of white steam. When it cleared, the green-haired, very voluptuous, Palutena was replaced with the silver-haired, muscled Roxas, as naked as the illusion of his wife had been, sitting beside Rias and laughing. Nice one, Rias. You're getting good. Roxas snickered, not even flinching when Rias slapped him in the face. That wasn't funny, Roxas. She shouted. But it was convincing. Roxas chuckled in return. You fell for it hook, line and sinker, Rias. Roxas looked over at Rias, and saw that steam was practically coming out of Ria's nose and ears, as she looked upon Roxas's naked body, which was right in front of her. When she looked close enough at him, she saw good fucking Yahweh above, was the 10 inches. 11.5, to be exact. Roxas replied, with a smirk. Anyway, Rias. Anything else you want to ask? He disappeared in another cloud of white smoke, and Palutena sat next to Rias again. Palutena smirked, before reverting back to her real, sexy as fuck silver-haired man form. Why? Rias, who was still slightly annoyed at being duped by the same trick for the second time in a week in outside time chamber time, cried. Why did you do that? Did you really have to transform into your wife? And that's weird as fuck, by the way. Roxas laughed, again, before adopting a more serious expression. Yes, I did have to transform into Palutena. He replied. Because, Rias. He shrugged. I knew you had feelings for me, and I know you've had them for a while. What? Rias cried, at this revelation. Yup. Roxas replied. However, I knew that you'd never, ever, tell me your feelings to my face, just like every anime girl ever, particularly the tsunders. Fuck, I hate tsunders and any boy who doesn't even know what the words, penis, breasts, and vagina, mean. Then why transform into Palutena? Rias replied. And you haven't even acknowledged how weird that is. Rias, I might be a pervert, but I'm not stupid. Roxas replied. I know that you're a lot more comfortable around Palutena than around me. So, I thought, why not transform into her and get you to reveal your feelings for me that way? Quote. That is a really sneaky thing to do. Rias remarked, in a deadpan voice. We're devils, Rias. Roxas replied. Or rather, you're a devil. I'm a Nephalem, but I'm still part devil, so it counts. Being sneaky, being selfish, indulging in and encouraging what those self-righteous fucks at the church call sin, which any other sane being would just call regular human nature, that's kinda our shtick. Fair enough. Rias replied, watching as Roxas got up, not even bothering to cover his modesty. Anyway. I'm gonna go to bed. See you in the morning, Rias. Roxas made to leave, but he felt a hand grab his wrist. When he turned around, he saw that Rias had stood up, and was holding his wrist. Roxas. She whispered, before taking a breath and speaking more boldly. Can I come with you? She asked. Can I sleep in your room with you? Roxas blinked. You know what? Sure. He replied. Come on. In one quick move, Roxas had picked Rias up, bridal style, and was carrying her through a transportation circle, into his bedroom. And by the way, Rias. Roxas remarked. I transform into Palutena all the time, and Palutena transforms into me all the time. We fuck each other in the forms of the other just to see what it feels like. Rias flushed again. Line break. The day of the rating game. Roxas's eyelids flickered for a few seconds, before, with a small groan, they opened, revealing slightly sleepy red eyes, the owner of which sat up and yawned. Roxas looked down and smiled slightly, at the sight of the naked form of his aunt, Roxas Gremory, sleeping as soundly as a baby, next to him. Her right had been draped over his torso, and when Roxas looked behind him, he saw that her left arm was in the perfect position to be wrapped around the back of his neck. Evidently, she'd been using her nephew as a body pillow. Yawning, Roxas slipped out of bed, stripped himself of the boxers he'd slipped on last night. He was very in favor of bending Rias over the bed and taking her like no man would ever be able to take her, but Rias wanted to wait until her freedom from Riser was ensured, lest she lose the match and face the consequences of rebelling against her family and sleeping with a man other than her husband, something which Roxas understood and accepted, and walked into his ensuite shower room. About 20 minutes later, Roxas came out of the shower, and dressed himself in his normal attire, while watching Rias slowly wake up. Morning, sleepyhead. Roxas greeted his aunt, who sat up in bed, and yawned, cutely. Morning. Rias groaned, as she stretched herself, and stood up out of bed. Today's the day, huh? She asked, while looking over at Roxas. Yup. Roxas replied, stretching himself. After you decided to fall asleep on top of your nephew last night, I heard from Mom that she's coming over in 2 hours to teleport you and your peerage to the raiding game. So, get dressed. Rias nodded, and changed into her school uniform. She had nothing else to wear before leaving the room along with Roxas, and the two of them walked downstairs together. After a delicious breakfast cooked by Akino and Asia with Rias and Mirajan's help, as Rias wanted to thank Roxas in some way for his hospitality and help in training her and her peerage Roxas, Palutena, Rias and Ria's peerage sat in the living room, in a rather tense silence. Kaneko, who had her cat ears and tail out, was pulling on a pair of black fighter gloves with pink cat paw prints on the upper palms. Rias, Azane and Mirajan were drinking tea. Roxas and Palutena were sat next to each other, with Roxas's head on Palutena's shoulder. Palutena was gently stroking her husband's silky, silver hair, while everyone was silent. As a silver transportation circle opened at the entrance to the room, Roxas sat up, as Grayfia came out of it. Greetings, everyone. She greeted everyone with a bow. Lady Rias, are you ready? I am. Rias replied, drinking the rest of her tea, and sitting up. When does the game start? In about 10 minutes. Grayfia replied. You will be transported to the battlefield when the time is near. Battlefield. Azane looked confused. It's an alternate dimension created just for the game. Usually by a party neutral to those fighting. Roxas replied. So, I guess Serafal or Juka will be creating a dimension for this game. You are correct, Roxas. Grayfia replied. Lord Ajuka is the one creating the dimension for the raiding game. I will be the one refereeing the match. Fair enough, Mom. Roxas remarked, as Grayfia continued speaking. By the way, Lady Rias, you should know that your older brother, your parents, your nephew, your cousin and Lord Saraor will be watching this raiding game. Grayfia addressed Rias, who looked slightly surprised. Sirzechs is watching. She asked. Yes. Though I personally don't agree with him taking time out of his duties, I do understand that this is an important occasion for him, your first raiding game. Grayfia explained. Roxas muttered something under his breath, which Rias didn't quite hear. However, she did distinctly hear the words, take a shit, in her nephew's mutterings. Right at that moment, Grayfia spoke again. It's time. Quote. Rias stood up, and stated, let's go. To her peerage, who followed her into a silver transportation circle that Grayfia created, and a second later, the 5 of them had disappeared. Once they were gone, Grayfia turned to Roxas. Roxas, would you like to come and watch the raiding game in the private booth, set up for Rias and Riser's relatives? She asked. As her nephew and trainer, I recommend that you do. Sure. Roxas replied. Palutena. You fancy coming? Nah. Palutena replied. Is it possible that the raiding game can be broadcast here? Yes. Please wait a moment. Grayfia replied. She pointed her finger at the 110-inch TV, and muttered something, before the TV glowed silver, and then stopped glowing. There. Grayfia replied. When the TV is turned on, the raiding game will be what is playing. Thanks. Palutena replied. See you, Rox. See ya, pal. Roxas replied, pressing his lips against Palutena's for a second before standing up and walking over to Grayfia, who took him through another transportation circle. Roxas and his mother came out in a room with a few chairs scattered around, all of which facing a large screen, which was broadcasting a blank screen right now. All the chairs were occupied, but that problem was solved when Grayfia waved her hand and created another chair for Roxas to sit on. Looking around, Roxas saw 9 people sat in the chairs. Zeodicus, who, to Roxas's satisfaction, had a welt in the spot exactly in between his eyes, where Roxas had pinged him with the Excalibur Galadine turned rubber band Venelana, Sirzechs, Milikas, Rika Phoenix, head of the Phoenix clan, Renzo Phoenix, Rika's husband, Fianna Asmodeus, former heiress to the house of Phoenix, much like how Sirzechs was the former heir to the house of Gremory, before Roxas, and later Rias, took that role, and Roxas's first cousin once removed, Saraord Bale. Rika Phoenix was a beautiful woman in her late 20s, with blonde hair, done up very high with ornate hair decorations and dark blue eyes. She wore a light purple dress, with dark purple accents and a blue bow at the front. At the back, 3 feather-like extensions, mimicking a bird's tail, protruded from the dress. Renzo Phoenix was a man in his mid to late 20s, with blonde hair that was spiked up at the back, dark blue eyes, and a rather noble aura exuding from him. He wore stereotypical noble's attire from the 19th to 20th centuries. Fianna Asmodeus was a stunningly beautiful woman in her early 20s, arguably as beautiful as Palutena or Grayfia. She had dark blue eyes, just like her parents, and long, smooth blonde hair, reaching down to her back. She wore a golden and red dress that hugged her buxom figure quite fittingly, accenting her chest, which was, at a glance, around as developed as Akino, give or take a centimeter or two, hips and long legs, which were seen only through a cut on her dress. She wore a dark purple hair clip in the form of a phoenix on her left side. Ruvel Phoenix, Fianna's younger twin brother, like his older sister, 2 younger brothers and 1 younger sister, had blonde hair and dark blue eyes. He wore proper noble clothing, much like his father. Sarahorg Bale, the heir to the House of Bale, was a tall, handsome young man, appearing to be around the same age as Roxas, with short black hair, spiked over to the right side, and violet eyes. He had a very muscular build, and he wore a white and purple long-sleeved coat, with golden trimming. Everyone looked up, and saw Roxas, while Grayfia magic circled away. "Hey, everyone." Roxas grinned, his hands in his pockets. Venelana, Sirzechs, Renzo, Rika and Ruvel greeted Roxas in friendly manners, while Zeoticus just frowned, and glared at Roxas. Sarahorg looked upon Roxas with slight interest, and Fianna smiled up at Roxas. However, Milikas was the most outspoken in his happiness to see Roxas. "Big bro." The youngest son of Sirzechs and Grayfia chirped, jumping up from his chair and wrapping his arms around Roxas. "Milikas." Zeoticus spoke, slightly sternly, to Milikas. "Don't do something like that in present company." "Oh, let him, Lord Zeoticus." Fianna spoke up, as she stood up from her chair. "You're only young once, you know." As Milikas let go of Roxas and returned to his seat, Fianna, who was as tall as Roxas, walked over to him and wrapped her arms around the man who, though she wasn't his official godmother, she viewed as more of a godson to her than Seraphal did. Seraphal might be Fianna's best friend, but even the former heiress to the Phoenix clan had to admit that Seraphal, rather than acting as Roxas's godmother, acted more as a childish, yet cute and flirty, older sister to the silver-haired Gremory. "Roxas, my dear." Fianna spoke, softly. "It's been too long. And it's so nice to see you again." "Nice to see you too, Fianna." Roxas replied, as he took a seat on the chair created for him, which was between Fianna and Sarahorg. "Have you been okay?" Fianna asked. "I've only heard of your re-emergence a week or so ago, and I've had barely any time to come and see you. How have you been?" "Very good, thanks." Roxas replied, as Milikas walked over to Roxas and perched himself on his knee. He and Fianna began talking among themselves until the screen in front of them flashed. In the rating game dimension, Rias and her peerage were sat down on sofas in the orc room of an exact replica of Kuo Academy, with Rias explaining to Azane upon their arrival that this was a fake version of the school, created for the rating game by Ajuka Beelzebub. "Hello, everyone." Grayfia's voice sounded. It seemed to sound all around them. "Welcome to today's rating game between Lady Rias, the heiress to the House of Gremory, and Lord Riser Phoenix, the third son of the House of Phoenix. My name is Grayfia Lucifuge, and I will be the arbiter of today's match." Ria's peerage was silent as Grayfia continued to speak. "I took suggestions from both Lady Rias and Lord Riser, and had this battlefield, which is a perfect replica of Kuo Academy, an educational institution in the human world, created for this match. The location where both teams were transported to will be their base, with Ladzi Ria's base being in the Occult Research Club's clubroom, located in the old school building, and Lord Riser's base being the Student Council room, located in the new school building. Pawns will be promoted if they can make it to the other team's base." Mirajan handed out earphone-type things to all the members of Ria's peerage, instructing them all to place them into their ears, which would enable them to communicate with each other on the battlefield. "In 1 minute, the battle will commence." Grayfia's voice sounded. "This match will continue until either one of the kings has been defeated, or until one of the kings has surrendered. Good luck to both sides. All right, everyone." Rias unrolled a map of Kuo Academy and placed it onto the desk. "I've been thinking for a bit, and I've a good idea of what to do for this match." "What are your orders, President?" Kiba asked. "Well, first," Rias replied, walking over to the window, where she had a perfect view of the only exit from the new school building, opened the window, and extended her hand. When Azane looked, she saw that 4 magic circles had appeared, in 2 rows of 2, outside the door, in such a way that it impossible for anyone to not step on them, if they were to walk out of that door. "What was that for, Rias?" she asked. "You'll see, Azane." Rias replied. "Well, hopefully. Anyway." She pointed to Mirajan. "Mirajan. Use one of your Satan soul forms, and destroy the school gymnasium." Quote. Mirajan nodded, spread 4 devil wings, and jumped out of the school building, going into her default Satan soul form. Conjuring a huge ball of darkness, she flung it at the school gymnasium, and blew it up on the spot, before returning, and going back into her original form. "What was that for, Rias?" Azane asked, again. "The gym is like the center of a chessboard, Azane," Rias explained, patiently. "If the enemy were to take it, we would be at a tactical disadvantage. Added on to the fact that as a building, it's more secure than being wide open. I don't want Riser to have the chance to take it. Azane nodded, and stood back, looking out of the window when she saw the doors to the new school building opening, and two people walking out of them. The first woman who walked out was a young woman with long pale blue hair and amber eyes, that had purple highlights around them. She had tanned skin and wore a bikini made up of a metallic underwire brassiere and a silk loincloth that exposed her sides. She also wears a silver-colored tiara and neck rings with a ruby and blue gem respectively. Other accessories that she wore included ruby orb earrings, a snake-themed bracelet on her upper arm and a transparent pink veil across both her arms. This was Sharia, a pawn of Riser's peerage. The second woman was a young girl with blue hair and light brown eyes. Her hair was styled with 4 short ponytails, with 2 of the 4 pointed up and the other 2 pointed down. The front of her hair had split bangs going across her forehead, with side bangs framing her face. Her outfit consisted of a white houri with a red obi, which she wore under a red happy coat. She wore bandages on her forearms and shins, and wore black guards over her hands. For footwear, she wears a pair of zori. She also carried a long staff. This was Mira, another pawn of Riser's peerage. She was known as the weakest member. "All right, Mira," Sharia said. "Let's get a feel for this battlefield, then report back to Lord Riser immediately." "Right," Mira replied, taking a step out of the door, and, almost instantaneously, beginning to feel somewhat drowsy. The blue-haired pawn yawned loudly. "What's up with you?" Sharia asked, before stepping outside, and beginning to yawn herself. "Hey. Are you feeling tired?" "Yeah," Mira replied, stumbling slightly. "I feel as if I could just." She began to fall forward. Fall asleep. Mira crashed into the ground, and Sharia did, seconds later, right next to her. From the other side of the battlefield, Rhea snapped her fingers, and the 2 front magic circles activated, and the fast asleep Mira and Sharia got a concentrated blast of power of destruction to the face each. They didn't even feel a thing, as they were each enveloped in a blue light, and disappeared. 2 of Lord Riser's pawns have been retired. Grayfia's voice sounded. Back in the clubroom, Rhea smirked to herself, before turning back to her peerage. "Now." Rhea spoke to Azane and Kaneko. "Azane. Kaneko. I want you 2 to go out first. Engage any opposition you face, and show no mercy." "Got it," Azane replied, activating her boosted gear. Kaneko nodded, cracking her knuckles, and letting out a small, "Nya." The brunette host of Deedrag and the white-haired Nekosha walked out of the orc room, and out onto the courtyard of the school, where almost immediately, they were met with hostile forces. The first 2 of the 5 girls that, presumably, had been sent out to fight seemed to be twins, both with turquoise hair that they tied to one side of their head with a yellow ribbon. Azane noted that each twin had tied their hair to the opposite side of their head to the other twin, and blue eyes. Both of their outfits consisted of gym uniforms, which consisted of white t-shirts with blue accents, black leggings, and blue sneakers over knee-high socks. They also wore an orange wristband on their right wrist. They both carried blue chainsaws, and Azane saw discarded gym bags on the ground. The third person was a young girl with shoulder-length brown hair and blue eyes, dressed in a sleeveless French-made uniform that exposed her cleavage, with a white lace design on the edges, as well as a made headpiece, half-apron, and forearm-length fingerless gloves. The fourth was also a young girl, but with shoulder-length light brown hair and dark brown eyes, dressed in a buttoned, sleeveless, French-made uniform with a white lace design, along with a standard-made headpiece, cuffs, and a white half-apron to go with the set. She also wore light gray tights. The fifth and final person, stood behind the first 4 girls, was a woman with short, light brown hair and gray eyes. Her hair had 3 red highlights across, and wore a plain white mask which covered the right side of her face. Her outfit consisted of a black jacket and matching jeans. The jacket had wide shoulders and a wide collar, and features 3 leather straps on both her arms. It was also slightly open, revealing her rather large breasts and cleavage, and was cut off at her midriff. Her jeans had a section on her right pant leg cut off, revealing some of her thighs and rear end, and also featured 3 leather straps on her calves, just below the ankles, and 2 extra straps on her right pant leg to keep it in place. She also wore black fighting gloves and boots. "Damn. Burnt chicken shits," Azane whispered, getting into a battle stance. "I'll take the rook," Kaneko remarked, pointing to the woman in the mask. "You keep those 4 pawns off me, okay?" "Got it," Azane replied, as Kaneko rushed forward, springing over the 4 pawns, and landing behind them, instantly beginning to engage the masked woman in combat. Azane, cracking her knuckles, rushed forward to engage the 4 girls in combat. Chapter 10. Anything you recognize isn't mine. Azane, Eel, Nell, Marion and Berent. Azane thought that she felt a tiny bit of skin leave her nose as she leant back extremely far, dodging the swing of a chainsaw, swung by one of Riser's pawns. The brunette host of D-Drake, with the boosted gear on her arm, then had to pull a backward somersault to dodge a swing from the other pawn. When she landed on her feet, she heard the Red Dragon Emperor call out boost. Second boost. Azane thought, as she jumped over the twin chainsaw wielders and landed in front of the maid girls, who both sent waves of water magic at him. But I need to keep going. And not get hit, either. Azane whirled around, and dashed momentarily away from Eel and Nell, the two chainsaw wielders, while D-Drake called out boost. Third time. Azane thought. Once I get to 5, what did Elsha teach me about elemental magics and their counters? Oh yeah, lightning beats water. Single quote. Eel ran at Azane, thrusting her chainsaw out and attempting to run her through with the mechanical saw, but Azane jumped onto a part of the chainsaw that didn't have the deadly blade thing spinning at incredible speeds, and used that as a platform to jump into the air, while flicking her heel at the back of Eel's head to send her to the ground and disorientate her for a bit. Landing on the ground, Azane swiveled around Nell, dodged the water blasts of Marion and Berent, the two maids, and grinned. Boost. D-Drake called, for the 4th time. Azane rolled in between Eel and Nell, in order to confuse them into accidentally hitting each other with their chainsaws and injuring them, though unfortunately, no vital organs or blood vessels were hit, and jumped back up, swinging around to face them. Boost. D-Drake called, and the boosted gear's green jewel glowed. In her right hand, Azane created a whip, about 40 centimeters long, made entirely out of lightning. Transfer. D-Drake shouted, and Azane saw the whip instantly grow, thanks to the power of the boosted gear, to a length of just over 3 meters, and small little offshoots of electricity bounced from the whip. Grinning, Azane swung the whip at Marion, and caught her full in the face, knocking the green-wearing maid down to the ground. Berent, the blue-wearing maid, met a similar fate, while Azane hit them again once each, for good measure, while using her gauntlet-clad arm to block the chainsaws of Eel and Nell. When the two maids got back to their feet, pissed off to every degree possible, they tried, in tandem, to create a huge bubble of water around Azane that would drown her, and surely retire from the match. However, they only managed to create a bit of water above Azane's head, before that shuddered and expired. What the hell? Marion shouted, backing away from Azane. Why won't our ultimate drowning technique work? Berent cried, doing the same. Because your bodies are currently full of magical lightning, which overpowers the water magic, stopping you from using it. Azane replied, as she kicked Eel in the chest, sending her back, and punched Nell in the face with her whip-clad hand, sending her back as well. In short, you're basically like the ultra-conservative priests that refuse to progress with the growing world, according to Roxas, useless pieces of fucking shit. Before Eel and Nell could get up, Azane rushed at Marion and Berent, and before they could do anything like cast a magic circle shield, thanks to Azane making the 5 meters run towards them in less than a 20th of a second, and crashing his fist against Marion's face with far more than enough force to send her flying. Marion had been enveloped in a blue light, and had disappeared before she hit a tree, which, had they not been fighting in a raiding game, been easily enough to kill her. Berent met a similar fate, seconds later. Woo. Azane rolled her shoulder. Motherfucker, those weights that Roxas removed from us last night really did a job. We can agree on that, partner. D-Drake remarked. Even if you were being trained by that host-murdering bastard, I must begrudgingly admit that thanks to him, you've grown far stronger than even Elsha or Belzard grew, within 6 months of unlocking my gear. Thanks, I guess. Azane remarked. That's weirdly nice of you to fuck. Azane let out a shout of pain as, by instinct, she jerked her arm away from Eel, who had picked up her chainsaw and rushed at Azane, swinging it angrily. Had Azane not moved her arm, it would very likely have been removed from her body. However, she just suffered a light gash, which oozed blood. Motherfucker. Azane growled, turning to Eel, who tried to stab her in the chest with her chainsaw. However, Azane was far too quick for her, raising her fist and crashing it down on the top of her head, retiring her instantly. Eel. Nell shouted, rushing at Azane while seeming to coat her chainsaw in fire. However, this was no problem to Azane, who just reached forward and grabbed the chainsaw with her boosted gear-covered hand. The chainsaw, rev as it might, didn't even scratch the Red Dragon Emperor's gauntlet, which Nell found out, all too late, as Azane's non-boosted gear-clad fist came out to meet Nell's face. It turned out that, boosted gear on hand or no boosted gear on hand, Azane's fist on its own was far more than enough to retire the low-class devil. 4 of Lord Riser's pawns have been retired. Grayfia's voice called, all around everyone. Line break. Back in the booth, Roxas smiled to himself as he watched Azane transfer the boosted gear's power to a whip made of magical lightning, and use that whip to deal with her opponents. Man. Roxas thought. I wonder where she picked up the trick. I can remember Elsha doing something like that during our spars together. Single quote. Right as he had the thought, Roxas looked down at the floor, suddenly remembering the day that he ended up indirectly killing Elsha with his power of destruction. The silver-haired Nephalem felt tears begin to well up in his eyes, and he wiped them away before anyone could see them. Whispering something to Milikus to get him to get off his lap, Roxas left the room, muttering something to Sirzechs about needing fresh air. Once he was outside the booth, and in the hallway, the second oldest man alive to currently carry the name of Gremory took a number of deep breaths, in an attempt to calm himself. Fucking hell, Roxas. Roxas growled to himself. Don't think about that. Think about what? A female voice asked. Roxas jumped, and looked to see Fianna walking out of the door, and looking at Roxas with her warm, dark blue eyes. Hang on a minute, don't tell me, Roxas. I think I know what you're thinking about. You were always the smartest of the Satans. Roxas replied. Aside from Ajuka. Fianna replied. Anyway, let me guess. Was it Elsha? Yeah. Roxas replied, leaning against the wall and looking up at the ceiling, which was a pleasant-looking orange color. He sighed. Sorry, Fia. You must hate hearing me talk about that day. Oh, no, I don't hate it at all. Fianna replied, walking towards Roxas. You must have heard it from me at least 500 times, but it wasn't your fault. Well, not entirely, but you know what I mean. The blonde Satan sighed, herself. I still can't believe how Venelana just glossed over the entire workings of how to control the power of destruction when she taught you how to use it. I mean, she did with Sirzechs, but why not with you? Maybe she thought I'd inherit Dad's control of it. Roxas asked. Fianna shrugged. There's infinite possible reasons. She replied. Lucifer knows. But Roxas, what I said those centuries ago still stands. Though Roxas was leaning himself against the wall, she still found a way to sneak her arms around his body and hug him close to her. If you just want to talk to me about what happened, or you just need support, you know where to find me. My doors are always open, Roxas. If you actually want to get some pointers from me about using your power of destruction, I'll be happy to do the best I can. Though I don't know everything about it, and I doubt I'll have enough time to go over every detail, given my duties as a Satan. Thanks. Roxas replied. But no thanks on the teaching me how to use power of destruction thing. I actually sealed my ability to use it. Oh. Fianna raised an eyebrow. I see. I understand, Roxas. Even without your power, you're still an extremely powerful young man, as much as you were handsome Tilda. Hey, thanks. Roxas replied. I get that a lot. Not least from a certain someone you know. Oh, I know. Fianna replied. You should have heard Sarah when we talked to each other after her talk with Yusaka in Kyoto. It took an age and a half to get her to stop ranting and raving about how mean a godson you were, never allowing her a chance, even after all the times she tried to make sure that you were safe at all times. She looked up at Roxas. Her words, not mine. But I imagine she was referring to the times she snuck into bed with you. Yeah. Roxas replied. I bet she was. You'd never go as far as to sneak into my bed, naked as all fucking hell, unannounced as all fucking hell. Quote. True, I never did, but I was certainly tempted to, one time. Fianna replied. When Roxas looked confused, she smiled. It was after, you know. She quickly continued. Anyway, you'd fallen asleep, doubtlessly under deep emotional stress from what had transpired. I snuck into your bedroom to check up on you, and I decided to give you a little massage. Tilda, the devil that was known as the goddess of the infernal storm, gave Roxas a seductive wink, as well as a small, playful smile. HNN. The silver at Nephalem replied. Thanks. No problem. Fianna replied. And well, since you're certainly my type of man, there's a chance I could ease your tensions in a rather different way. Fianna shifted her mouth closer to Roxas's ear, and spoke in more of a whisper than normal speech. Only if you're interested, of course. Fianna proceeded to slowly lick Roxas's ear, while moving her hand over his chest. Tilda, so many things I'd love to do with you, Roxas. You wouldn't regret a second of it, I assure you. Haha. Roxas replied, shuddering slightly, but otherwise offering no reaction. Fianna would have to try a lot harder than that if she wanted to get any serious reaction out of him by flirting alone. I'll consider it, thanks. Good. Fianna delivered Roxas a small kiss to the cheek. Now. Let's get back in that booth. They'll be worrying about us soon enough. Yay. Roxas replied, walking back into the booth, with Fianna following, while the two devils returned to their seats, and Milikus returning to his spot on Roxas's knee. Line break. Kaneko and Isabella. Kaneko ducked down to the right, dodging Isabella's haymaker, lifted herself back up to her full height, which, admittedly, was rather unformidable, and raised her foot before delivering a harsh kick to the stomach of the oncoming Isabella, forcing her to stumble for a second, leaving the masked rook open to a quick punch to the face, making her stumble backwards a bit more. "Motherfucker, you're strong," Isabella muttered, as something that looked like blue fire was gathered in Kaneko's right hand. "You're certainly better than I anticipated, Rook of Roxas Gremory." "Shut up," Kaneko replied, dashing at Isabella faster than a normal rook would have been able to, and sinking her fist into her stomach while she talked. The blue flame-like substance also impacted Isabella, causing her to cry out in pain far more than a normal punch like that would have done, even to a rook like her. What the hell?" Isabella growled, coughing up blood. "A punch like that from a midget like you shouldn't have done that much damage to me." She coughed up some more blood as Kaneko walked towards her. "I disrupted your ki flow with that last punch, making you lot weaker," Kaneko replied, cracking her knuckles. "It's only because you were a rook that stopped you from being retired on the spot." Isabella tried to punch Kaneko again, but the white-haired Nekomata, seeing her punch coming, caught her fist and crushed it in one hand. "And one more thing," Kaneko said, coldly, as Isabella was forced to her knees from such pain. "Don't call me a midget." One punch later, Isabella had fallen to the ground completely, knocked out. She was enveloped in a blue light, and retired from the game. "One of Lord Riser's rooks has been retired," Grayfia stated. "Are you okay, Azane?" Kaneko asked, turning around and looking at Azane, who was lightly clutching her arm. "You're injured." "I'm fine," Azane replied, as Kaneko walked over, senjutsu glowing in her hands. "I'll heal you," she stated. "Kuroka taught me how to heal using senjutsu." Cute. Azane and Kaneko both heard the mocking remark, as well as the sound of displaced air coming from right above them. Someone was firing an attack at them. Purely by instinct, they both got away from that spot as soon as possible, and looked up, at the same time, at the person who had just attacked them. The person was a busty woman with long, wavy purple hair that fell all the way down to her back, and matching purple eyes. At the front, the right side of her hair fell over her breast and covered her right eye, while the left side fell near to the top of her skirt. Her attire was a dress consisting of a navy blue tunic top, with gold accents and a pale blue skirt with open sides, and black shoes over matching thigh-high stockings with garter belts. The top of her dress revealed much of her cleavage, and was held with a gold choker with blue and red jewels. Over this, she wore a white overcoat with black and gold accents and matching pauldrons. For accessories, she wore a black headband with a red-orange jewel over her forehead to keep her long hair in place, and wielded a staff-like scepter. For cosmetics, she wore purple lipstick, matching her eyes and hair. Extending from her back were 4 devil wings, and extending from her back was a single tail, that ended in the shape of a heart, a succubus tail. Evidently, Riser had a devil-sex-demon hybrid for a queen. "Hey, you two." Azane and Kaneko looked up, and saw Mirajan, in her, Satan's soul, Allah, form, flying towards the woman on 6 devil wings. "Hey, Mira," Kaneko replied. "Take care of that slut for us." Mirajan gave a demonic grin. "Gladly," Ria's queen replied, gathering lightning in her hands and looking at the woman, who, given the demonic power that oozed from her body, she could only assume was Riser's queen. "Mirajan and Ubeluna. Show me what you got, bomb queen Ubeluna." Mirajan challenged Ubeluna, the lightning in her hands intensifying. "Gladly, Satan's soul Mirajan Strauss." Ubeluna replied, waving her staff and creating several magic circles around Mirajan, that sent large explosive spells at her, from multiple angles. However, one of those angles didn't include right beneath Mirajan, so that was where she went, easily evading the attack that would have dealt her severe damage. Grinning at Ubeluna, who thought, judging by the look on her face, that she had easily dealt with her king's fiancée's queen, Mira flew forward and sunk her fist into her stomach, causing her to groan loudly in pain and fly upwards. On the offensive now, Mira extended her hands upwards and let fly a huge mixture of lightning and ice, sending it straight at Ubeluna, who could only destroy the ice shards that flew at her. She was unable to do anything about the lightning, which impacted her and caused her to cry out in pain. "Having fun, bitch." Mirajan's grin became slightly more demonic, while she flew at Ubeluna with great speed, headbutting her and kicking her down to the ground. "I certainly am." Ria's white-haired queen laughed, as she blasted Riser's purple-haired queen with a devastatingly fast hailstorm, opening a great number of wounds that drew blood from the devil-sex-demon hybrid. "Mirajan," Rias called, concerned. "You okay?" The sound of her king's voice caused Mirajan to jolt out of her demonic trance for a second, and remember exactly where she was, and how she'd gotten there. That included the extensive meditation she'd done with Valian, to keep her from going out of control. "Yeah, I'm fine," Mirajan replied. "Sorry, Rias. I almost. As Mirajan had been talking with Rias, the bloodied and bruised Eubeluna, pissed off to every degree possible at being beaten and humiliated in such a manner, flew at Mirajan, casting a number of explosion spells that flew at her. Every single one made their mark, causing Mira to let out her own shout of agony and fly backwards. As Mira righted herself in the air, she saw Eubeluna reaching into a pocket dimension with her left hand, and pulling out a three-pronged spear, a trident. You're powerful, I'll give you that, Mirajan Strauss. Eubeluna growled, infusing her trident with demonic power, and pointing it at her, along with her scepter. But this ends now. You and your red-haired king will fall before Lord Riser. Oh, shut up. Mirajan, legitimately annoyed, which was something incredibly hard to do, as Mirajan was an extremely caring, sisterly type person that saw everyone, no matter who, as someone that should be treated with kindness, shouted, flying towards Eubeluna, demonic power and killing intent oozing from her body. You do know that Rias has already promised herself to someone else. Bullshit. Eubeluna replied, pointing both her trident and scepter at Mira and beginning to fire explosion spells from both of them, in a manner similar to dual-wielding assault rifles, directly at her. Whoever they are, I'm sure that Lord Riser will overpower them and take them down, with his loyal, beloved Quen at his side, just as he will take Rias in marriage. This was such a ludicrous statement to Mirajan, who created shields out of sand on her hands that easily took every explosion spell that was fired at her, that she was forced to laugh, when she made it to Eubeluna. That's the stupidest thing that I've ever heard in my life. She shouted, as she grabbed onto Eubeluna's trident when she tried to stab her, and forced it away from her. Imogen beat your dear king without suffering a scratch, without using her dragon powers, and without even needing a shower afterwards, so I've heard. What makes you think that Riser, or anyone else in his cabal of whores, could beat Roxas Gremory? Eubeluna would have spouted out some bullshit answer, but Mira extended her other hand out towards Eubeluna's face, and let fly a large amount of sand that entered Eubeluna's eyes, causing her to drop both scepter and trident and rub her eyes hard, from the agony. Meanwhile, Mira noticed a bulge in her top, and reached into it. Eubeluna was too busy rubbing at her eyes to try and stop her, and pulled something out, a small vial of phoenix tears. Hey! Eubeluna shouted, as she, though her eyes streamed, was able to see, as she grabbed at Mirajan. That's mine. Correction. Mirajan replied, as she placed it in her sundress. That was yours. Switching into her default Satan soul form, she raised her scale-covered hands and delivered a two-fisted blow from above, hitting Eubeluna's head with such strength that she flew into the ground, with enough force to cause an immense shockwave. Mirajan also swore that Eubeluna's head had a huge dent in it, thanks to the blow she had dealt. Lord Riser's queen has been retired. Grayfia stated, as Mirajan descended to the ground, just as Kaneko finished healing Azane. Line break. Back at Roxas's house, Palutena, Akino, Valian, Akasha, Kuroka and Tobio, who had been invited by his second cousin Akino, were gathered around the 110-inch TV, and watching the rating game between Rias and Riser. Valian, who had just taken a sip of Pepsi, grinned at Mirajan's fight against Eubeluna. He. She chuckled. Nice one to Mirajan, blinding Riser's queen like that, taking her phoenix tears, and dealing the finishing blow like that. I swear I saw a dent in Riser's queen's head when she went down. Tobio remarked. Me too. Valian replied. Though. She sighed. She didn't have to leave herself open like that, while she was talking to Rias, I can only assume. If I ever get to meet up with her again, I'll have to make sure to instill a discipline in her to not do it again. Quote. That does sound very you, Valian. Palutena remarked, as she accepted a drink from Asia. Akino, Akasha, Kuroka and Tobio were fast to agree with Roxas's wife. Line break. What the fuck? Riser shouted, slamming his fist against a table in anger, and igniting it by accident. As the table burned, he turned to his remaining servants, Schwalen, his rook, Revel Phoenix, his younger sister and first bishop, Mahai, his second bishop, Carlamine and Cyrus, his two knights, and Nian Li, his two pawns. Schwalen was a well-endowed young woman of Chinese descent with shoulder-length black hair and blue-green eyes. Her hair had two Chinese-style buns on both sides of her head, while the front featured bangs that formed a slight V-shape across her forehead. Her outfit consisted of a navy blue kippah with gold accents, a white sash around her stomach, and black, low-heeled shoes. The kippah was open at the chest area, giving view to Schwalen's breasts and cleavage. She also wore black armguards over her forearms, and didn't seem to wear any undergarments. Revel was a beautiful young girl with dark blue eyes. She had long blonde hair tied into twin tails with large, drill-like curls and blue ribbons keeping them in place. The front of her hair had several bangs hanging over her forehead, with a V-shaped fringe hanging over the bridge of her nose. She wore the same dress as her mother, but it was smaller, to go along with how baby-sized she was. Mahai was a young girl with light brown eyes, who wore a kimono with a color pattern of purple, orange and pink, with her black hair tied on opposite sides. Carlamine was a young woman with light brown hair and green eyes. Her outfit consisted of a full set of silver armor, with black accents that seemed to be a cross between a European knight's and a Japanese samurai, and wore a headband that went across her hair and forehead. She carried a broadsword in one hand, and had a dagger which had a gold hilt and bandages on the handle strapped behind her hip. The broadsword was slung on her left hip, and featured a red jewel on the pommel and had bandages across the handle, presumably for grip. Cyrus was tall, with long black hair with a dark blue tint, and brown eyes. Her hair featured 5 thin ponytails going around her head, which were held up by a golden hair accessory on top of her head. Her outfit consisted of a white top with black accents that was modeled after a Chinese cheongsam, red shorts, and armored knee-high boots with matching gauntlets. Her top featured a diamond shape on the chest area, giving view to her cleavage. She carried a giant Zweihander in her hands. Ni and Li seemed to be twins. They were 2 young girls, appearing to be in their teens. Being twins, they sported similar appearances, with the only major difference being that Ni had red eyes and blue hair, whereas Li had blue eyes and red hair. Also, Ni tied her hair in a ponytail, while Li had hers in a braid with a pink bow tied at the end. Both of them had light brown cat ears with black stripes. They also wore piercings on their ears, with Li having 2 gold earrings on her left ear and Ni having blue-colored ones on her right. Similarly, both of them have a fang sticking out of their mouths, with Ni having hers to her left, and Li having hers on her right, and thus mirroring each other. They were the same height as each other. "What's the matter, brother?" Ravel asked. "My glorious peerage is getting beaten by a bunch of weaklings, that's why, Ravel." Riser snapped at his younger sister in reply. "My fiancé can't be this strong, because I'll never be able to make her submit to me as my new queen." He sighed. "Schwalen, Mahai, Carlamine, Cyrus, Ni, Li, you're to go out and deal with the rest of Rhea's peerage. Overpower them with numbers and destroy them." The 6 servants did as they were ordered, and left, leaving Riser and Ravel alone together. Line break. Quote. "You okay, Mira?" Kaneko asked, looking up as Mira, panting slightly, landed on the ground. "Yay, I'm okay." Mirajan replied. "Just need a little bit of healing, that's all." "Well, I'll heal you." Kaneko replied, stepping forward. No, I'll do it myself." Mirajan replied, holding a hand up to stop Kaneko. "I'm okay, thanks Kaneko." "Hey!" A loud, female voice shouted. Azane, Kaneko and Mirajan all turned around, and saw 6 more of Riser's servants walking out into the yard, including 2 swordswomen and 2 Nekomata. "It stinks of Gremory filth out here." "Then your burnt KFC of a master shouldn't have agreed to the raiding game with Roxas Gremory." Azane shouted back. "But that wouldn't have done, now would it?" "Shut up." The girl in the Kyapo shouted. "Mahai, deal with that annoying bitch. She doesn't even look good enough for Riser." Quote. "I'll deal with the 2 Nekomata." Kaneko muttered, jumping into the air, while Mirajan took to the air herself, in order to heal. As Azane found herself confronted by the girl in the kimono, she felt a rush of wind move past her, and the grinding sound of metal on metal. She looked up, and saw Kiba, who had just arrived, clashing with the woman with the Zweihander, while jumping into the air to dodge the slash of the woman in armor. Azane looked back at Mahai, and reactivated her boosted gear, expecting to hear the voice of Didraig, boosting her power. However, the voice she heard instead was very different. "Hey, hello. Can you hear me, Azane?" "Elsha." Azane thought, while dodging a magical attack from Mahai. "That you?" "Oh, thank God, you can hear me." Elsha replied. "I've been trying for ages. Anyway, Azane, it's time. Are you ready?" "Ready for what?" Azane mentally replied. "I'm kinda in the middle of something." "Ready for your balance breaker, of course." Elsha spoke, in reply. "We talked about your balance breaker, didn't we?" "Oh, yeah." Azane replied. "Sorry." "Oh, it's okay." Elsha replied. "Don't worry. I'll help you activate it from in here. I'll just need about half a minute to activate it, though." Almost immediately, a red aura began to cover Azane, while she dodged Mahai's next magical attack. She continued to dodge, for another minute, until Elsha called again. "It's done." The second strongest host of Didraig called. "Go for it, Azane." "All right." Azane cried, raising her gauntlet-clad arm to the sky. "Balance. Breaker." The red aura around Azane intensified to an incredible degree, before it became overcome by a deep green light, that caused everyone who looked at it to have to cover their eyes. Once the light cleared, Azane found herself covered in a red dragonic armor. On the armor, there were green jewels set into it, contrasting perfectly with the red color. 4 dragon wings emerged from the back of Azane's armor, which, though it looked very heavy, still seemed to accentuate Azane's rather generous curves, for her age. Welsh dragon, balance breaker. Dedrag called. Scale male. Kiba, Carlamine and Cyrus. From the depths of his sacred gear, Kiba pulled out a new sword, compared to any of the ones that he usually used in a combative situation. This sword was closer to a long-handled dagger than a sword, as though the handle was long enough for Kiba to grip comfortably with 2 hands, the blade was barely half a meter long. It was a sword that Kiba had created, that had the ability to telekinetically control other swords within the vicinity. Case in point being Carlamine's sword and dagger, and Sirzechs' Zweihander. Are you serious? Cyrus blinked, and scoffed at Kiba. Do you really think a knife like that will be able to go up against our blades? She asked, as she rushed at Kiba, swinging her Zweihander at Rhea's knight. No, I don't. Kiba replied, jumping up into the air and flying over Sirzechs' head. Because it's not meant to. He landed on the ground, and swung the sword to the side. As Carlamine swung at Kiba, before her sword got anywhere near him, she found her sword swinging violently to the side, in the same direction that Kiba had swung his sword, surprising her so much that she momentarily lost balance. However, she regained it after a second, and swung at Kiba again, forcing him to use his sword to block the attack, and push her away with such force that Carlamine had to jump into the air and land on the ground. When she did, Kiba swung his sword upwards, and just like he wished, Carlamine's sword flew upward with such strength and to such heights that Rhyser's first knight found herself dangling a couple of feet in the air, hanging onto her sword. Kiba forced down a chuckle, as the image did look quite comical, and swung his sword to the side, and that final swing was enough to force Carlamine's sword from her hand and send her sprawling onto the ground. When she looked up at Kiba, and tried to hurriedly pull a dagger from behind her hip which Kiba sent flying with a flick of his sword, she looked up into his face. What the fuck kind of sword was that? She shouted. That's no sword a knight should wield. Maybe not. Kiba replied. But it's a sword that I want to wield. Jumping backwards to get out of the way of Sirzechs' sideways swing, Kiba swung his sword to the side, and sent Cyrus spinning in a full circle thanks to it. As Cyrus span, she accidentally let go of her sword, which went flying straight into Carlamine's head, instantly retiring her. Karlamine. Cyrus shouted, before turning to Kiba. You dick. She shouted, picking up her Zweihander and rushing at Rhea's blonde knight. However, Kiba had pulled out his sword of betrayer, which was the name that he had given to his holy demonic sword balance breaker, and slashed at Cyrus, causing a deep enough wound in her body to instantly retire her, thanks to that, along with the holy portion of his holy demonic sword. 2 of Lord Rhyser's knights have been retired. Azane and Mahai. Come at me. Azane shouted, instantly beginning to charge up her power with the boosted gear. Boost. 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 Dedrag shouted, as Mahai created a large wave of ice out of magic, and flung it at Azane. However, the ice just shattered on Azane's armor, eliciting a laugh from the current host of Dedrag. Is that all you've got? She asked, grinning underneath her armor. That's honestly pretty pathetic. Quote. Shut up. Mahai shouted, creating a huge sphere of boiling water and flinging it at Azane, who transferred her boosted up power to her legs, and ran through the sphere of water, with said sphere of boiling water being entirely ineffective against her armor. She tried to punch Mahai when he got to her, but Mahai teleported away behind Azane, and conjured up a large dragon, made out of pure demonic energy. Boost X10. Dedrag shouted. Azane transferred the boosted power to her fist, and punched her way through the dragon that Mahai created, while rushing towards the aforementioned Mahai, grabbing her by the head, and throwing her into the ground. F fuck. Mahai groaned, pulling herself to her feet and beginning to heal herself via magic. How can you be that strong? She shouted. You've only been reincarnated by Rhea's for a month. Yet you're. Because I've been training for over 5 times that long. Azane replied, grabbing Mahai off the ground, flying up into the air and piledriving Rhyser's unfortunate bishop into the ground. I feel like I could kick the world's ass, if I wanted to. Azane looked down onto the ground, and saw that Mahai looked like she had just been brutalized in the worst possible way. But only for a second, as she was enveloped in a blue light, and disappeared instantly. One of Lord Rhyser's bishops has been ready. Yeah, we get it, Grayfia. Azane muttered. Kaneko, Schwalen, Ni and Li. Kaneko, her cat ears and tail still out, clashed at the same time with Ni and Li, Rhyser's 2 Nekomata pawns. Their attacks, though weak, were perfectly coordinated, and caught the daughter of Fujimai off guard, on a few occasions. Hey, you try blocking a fast 1-2 punch from one annoyingly, Nai Nekomata while dodging a mid-air kick from the other one. It's hard work. Add on to the fact that Schwalen, the rook that had ordered Mahai to attack Azane, was also firing fiery shots from her legs at Kaneko whenever she could, things weren't looking very good for her. Shit. Kaneko thought. I gotta overpower these two pussies. And fast. Single quote. Jumping backward and landing on the ground, and ducking under a fireball fired by Shuelin, Kaneko focused senjutsu into her hands, and flung it at Ni and Li, who she could tell from a mile off didn't have the proficiency in senjutsu that she had, let alone the proficiency that someone like her sister had, and flung them at Ni and Li, who dodged. Deciding to go for Ni first, Kaneko rushed towards her, letting fly a punch that Ni idly sidestepped, while jumping into the air and kicking Kaneko in the head, stunning her for a second. That second being long enough for Kaneko to get hit in the back by a fireball from Shuelin. Fuck. Kaneko hissed, narrowly dodging another fireball while panting. This is getting really tiring. She muttered. She summoned as much of her strength as she could, and launched herself at Ni, and this time, her punch made its mark in Ni's face. With her flying backward, Kaneko instantly turned to Li, who was sliding towards her, trying to get the metaphorical high ground by, ironically, taking the low route. However, Kaneko was ready for her. Focusing senjutsu into her leg, she stamped downwards onto Li's stomach, using the senjutsu on her leg to stop her ki flow, like she'd done with Isabella. However, Li wouldn't be able to find out the implications of what Kaneko had done, as her stamp was more than enough to render her unconscious, meaning that she was retired. Leaning backwards far enough to watch a fireball whiz over her head, Kaneko righted herself and rushed at Ni, who was just getting to her feet, and realizing that she had no twin to back her up. Not so tough on your own, are you? Kaneko hissed, grabbing Ni by her ponytail and flinging her into the ground. Weak pussy. Kaneko kicked Ni in the head, instantly retiring her, before she turned around, feeling a second wind coming, and dashed at Shuelin, determined to end this fight so she could heal herself up. Kaneko jumped into the air, far out of Shuelin's leg reach, and threw a senjutsu-powered punch that narrowly missed Shuelin, thanks to her ducking out of the way. However, she had made the rookie mistake in dodging into the metaphorical path of Kaneko's other fist, which Ria's diminutive rook took full advantage of, hitting Shuelin in the face with a brutal hook with her left hand, sending her flying into the ground. Fuck. Shuelin shouted as she tried to get up, but when she saw Kaneko, senjutsu flying from her body, her pupils turning into more cat-like pupils, and glaring so hard at Shuelin. She wished she'd worn the brown pants. Or any pants at all, really. Quote. Suck it. Kaneko hissed, as she delivered one final blow to Shuelin, ending her match. Two of Lord Riser's pawns and one of his rooks are retired. Grayfia announced. Boom. Kaneko whirled around. Before her very eyes, she saw two large pillars of fire bursting from the top of the new school building, and Riser and Nephalem emerging from said pillars. As this happened, Kaneko heard another, slightly less loud boom. Whirling around again, she saw Rias bursting from the roof of the old school building, and evidently calling Mirajan to her aid, judging by how Mirajan, still in her Satan soul, Allah, form, flew up to her. Revel. Riser shouted, his dark blue eyes on both Mirajan and Rias. Take care of Ria's scummy servants on the ground. I'll deal with my future bride and her queen. Kiba and Azane, still in her balance breaker form, rushed to the aid of Kaneko, who was easily the most tired out of the three of them, and watched together as Nephalem descended down to the ground before them, a pair of fireballs in her hand. Rias, Mirajan and Riser. All right, Riser. Rias shouted, flying towards Riser, two balls of her power of destruction in hand. You're the only thing left standing between me and freedom. Prepare yourself, for we'll easily defeat you. Riser laughed, loudly and mockingly. We'll see about that, Rias. Riser replied, smirking at Rias, who growled, and let fly both blasts of her power of destruction. The first attack missed, but her second attack made its mark, and blew Riser's whole left arm off. He merely laughed as it reformed, in a swirl of fire. Is that all you can do, Rias? He asked. Your brother may be stronger than my older sister, but that doesn't make you any more likely to beat me. And once I have, I'll make sure to show you just how amazing I can be in bed. Never. Rias roared, letting fly a bigger blast of power of destruction that hit Riser's face. You baby-dicked little fuck. Once I and my peerage beat you and win this raiding game, I'm sleeping with Roxas. Even if he has a harem, I know that he actually treats me decently. Don't talk trash. Riser shouted, spreading a pair of flaming wings and accelerating towards Rias. You'd stoop so low as to have sex with your own nephew over me, your future husband. Why? And besides, how do you plan to beat my immortal flames? Fuck you, that's how. Rias and Mirajan both shouted, at the exact same time. Rias let out another blast of power of destruction that took out Riser's legs, while Mirajan created a huge storm of hail that battered and bruised Riser beyond recognition, delivering a coup de grace with an ice spike straight to the chest. However, all of that was for naught, as a second later, Riser was back to normal. Attack me from two different angles. How low of you, darling. he remarked, creating a fireball of his own. Now come on. He threw the fireball directly at Rias, followed by 2 larger ones. Rias managed to block the first one easily enough, but narrowly blocked the second and outright failed to block the third, which caused her to stumble backwards a bit. She retaliated in kind, but Riser just extended his hand out and took the blast of destruction straight to the hand, and though his entire arm was vaporized in a second, in another second, it was back. I think I've had enough of this little game, he remarked, throwing a punch at Rias, which connected with her face, and sent her flying to the side, and landing on the ground, a burnt bruise on her cheek. The third heir to the Phoenix clan snapped his fingers, and created a huge ball of fire that would surely destroy her body, had it hit her. And I think it's time for you to know your place, Rias. He threw the fireball at Rias, who widened her eyes, sure that this was it. However, in the corner of her mind, she remembered something that Roxas had talked to her about, during their discussion of tactics. Knowing that now, of all times, would be the perfect time to do it, as this was the example that Roxas had given, Rias closed her eyes and poured all her thoughts into doing what she wished to do, and fractions of a second before Riser's fireball impacted her. One of Lady Ria's rooks has been retired. Quote. Line break. Kuroka, who had been sniffling with happiness at how far her darling little sister Sharon had come, gave a sigh of slight sadness as Kaneko was retired from the game thanks to Ria's castling. Don't feel that bad, Kuroka. Akeno placed a hand on Kuroka's shoulder. Your little sisters fought the most out of anyone in Ria's peerage this entire match. Feel proud of her. I am. Kuroka replied. It's just. I talked to her last night. She really wanted to not get retired in her first rating game as a member of my mate's aunt's peerage. Well, some things just can't be helped. Tobio replied, looking at Azane, clad in balance breaker armor. And it's quite impressive to see Azane holding out in that balance breaker of hers for that long. The first time I remember going into balance breaker, I definitely didn't last that long. Only a minute or so at most before collapsing, I recall Sei telling me. Fair enough. Valian replied. I lasted half an hour in my armor before conking out, first time I got into it. Stop it, the two of you. Paluten aside, sounding slightly exasperated as her eyes were glued to the screen like they would be to Roxas's ass, if he was here. You're not the average American citizen, so stop flexing on everyone. Everyone laughed. Line break. Minutes earlier. Kiba, Kaneko, Azane and Ravel. Azane flew into the air and attempted to fire a huge blast of demonic energy at Ravel, but she was forced to fly to the side and cancel the attack as Ravel flung a fireball in her direction. However, that didn't stop her from firing a boosted shot of demonic energy at the 5th Phoenix child, even if it missed. Everyone. Kiba shouted, dashing out of the way of Ravel, moving behind her, and attempting to attack her with his sword of betrayer, but being blocked by magic circle shield. Keep moving. Go in a circle. All right. Azane replied from her point in the air, using the thrusters on her back to fly in a wide circle around Ravel, not far enough away to not be able to attack her accurately, but far enough away for Ravel to not have very much of a chance of getting a devastatingly strong hit in on her. Kaneko, while on the ground, was running on the ground, and rolling out of the way of fireballs that, though small, were easily enough to melt the stone that she ran on. While she ran, she gathered blasts of senjutsu up in her hands, and fired them at Ravel, who used magical shields to deflect the blasts, or stop them entirely. Ha, ha, ha. Kaneko panted, as she ran. I'm not sure I can take much more of this. Just keep going, Kaneko. Kiba shouted, creating an ice sword to freeze the fireball that Ravel shot down at him, and switching to his usual sword. Spreading his devil wings, he flew up at speed and slashed at Ravel, cutting her arm and leg off with 2 fast slashes. However, once he landed on the ground, they had already returned to Ravel's body in a flash of fire. You idiot pretty boy. Ravel shouted condescendingly down at the 3 peerage members. Our flaming regeneration has won our clan many a rating game, and my brother will easily win this one as well. Yeah, keep talking, you burnt seagull. Azane shouted, firing another demonic shot at Ravel, which hit her so hard in the shoulder that it blew her arm off. However, it regenerated in an instant, as Azane's power kept boosting. Excuse me. Ravel shouted back at Azane, creating another fireball, and flinging it at Azane, though it did very little to damage her armor. Who are you to call me something like that? It's Ravel Phoenix to you. More like Ravel sucks dicks. Azane yelled back, as Kiba made to recreate his sword of betrayer. However, something happened that stopped that particular occurrence from happening. That something happening to be Kaneko disappearing, and Rias appearing in her place. Seconds later, they heard the fateful announcement from Grayfia. One of Lady Ria's rooks has been retired. Rias. Kiba rushed over to Rias. What happened? Castling. Rias replied. I just switched places with Kaneko, to get out of the way of an attack from Riser. She sighed, as Ravel tried to fire a fireball down at her, but got interrupted by Azane. I don't feel good about it. It's alright, Rias. Kiba helped Rias up. You're not going to give up, are you? Never. Rias stood up herself, and let a crimson-colored killing intent ooze from her body. Let's blow our opponents away. Fuck yeah. Kiba and Azane both shouted, as Kiba finched on the sword of Betrayer, spread his wings, and swung at Ravel. However, his swing was blocked, while Rias flew above Ravel and fired upon her with her power of destruction, blowing up her head. For the 1 second that Ravel remained headless, her body fell through the air towards the ground. However, when her head regenerated, she caught herself on her fiery wings, and flew back up into the air. Okay, now I'm mad. Ravel flew upwards towards Rias. Come on, Rias. I'll defeat you myself AAAGH. Ravel had created a huge fireball, and intended fully to send it towards Rias, but she was distracted by Kiba flying up underneath her, and slashing at her legs, cutting off Ravel's leg, which did not regenerate. Now, Rias. Kiba shouted, as he faced down Ravel, who turned around in midair, and tried to attack Kiba. Rias fired a powerful blast of power of destruction at Ravel, which impacted her in the back, and instantly forced her to retire, in a haze of blue light. One of Lord Riser's bishops has been retired. Grayfia spoke. Lord Riser has no peerage members left, compared to Lady Rias 4. Mirajan. Rias called to her queen, who, for the past minute or so, had to hold off and fend for herself against Riser in her olive form. Almost instantly, Mirajan dodged another fireball from Riser, and flew over to Rias, panting hard. You okay? Mirajan, who had numerous burns and scars on her face, asked, pulling out the vial of Phoenix tears. You want these? No, you take them, Mira. Rias replied, snapping her fingers and letting a calm, green aura overcome her. I can heal myself. Ha. Riser flew over to Rias and her peerage, and floated before them. Do it. Heal yourselves to the best of your ability. Though my little sister was a total weakling who got retired by you from total fluke, you can never hope to compare to my immortal strength and demonic flames. We'll see about that, Riser. Rias shouted, as Mirajan drank the Phoenix tears and she finished healing herself. Come on, everyone. She shouted, flying forward. It's time to end this. Oh, shit. This raiding game with Riser is getting to be real swifty tilde now time to take off your pants and your panties, shit on the floor. Okay, I'll stop. That is all for today, see you next time and like you liked this story go give /fan2018 your support.